Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. So much to do on this Monday, the first live broadcast of 2021, a new year and a new hope for the rollout of the vaccine, which is progressing so rapidly in Israel. We're up to 4 million people vaccinated already in the United States, and the rollout will gather momentum. However, let's begin. We've got the president's phone call to cover. We got the objections in Congress to cover. We've got a lot of news to cover, but let's begin really with the key moment of the long weekend, cut number 10, Jim Donovan.
Their play clock is running on them. It's down to 12. Third down and 2. Out they come. Higgins comes near side left with Landry. Hodge out wide to the right. Hunt in the backfield. Mayfield takes the snap. He's going to run it to the right. Mayfield turns the corner and got the first down on the right side. He slides inside the 40-yard line. Minka Fitzpatrick tags him down. First down Browns at the 39-yard line of Pittsburgh. And the clock is running with 52 seconds left to go. It's a first down, and that bench area is starting to feel it right now.
And Baker had the awareness to slide down inbounds.
12,000 are going crazy inside First Energy Stadium. And wherever you are, this is starting to become very, very real that the Browns are going to go to the playoff. They're in victory formation, and Baker Mayfield takes a knee, and the clock will wind down. An amazing story. The Browns will get their 11th win of the year. They'll go to 11-5, and they're going to the playoffs. Unbelievable. What a season. The team's off the sideline, congratulating. They could meet each other next weekend at Heinz Field, and the ball game is over, and the Cleveland Browns have made it into the NFL playoffs for the first time in 18 long years. Wow, what a struggle. The way it should be, I guess, huh? The Steelers came in here. They had already locked up their playoff spot, and yet they played right down to the final gun. A 2-point conversion to tie the game goes as an incomplete pass, and the Browns get a couple of first downs on the next drive, recover the onside kick, and they win. And they're going into the tunnel. And the only thing that's missing, all of you.
Jim Donovan is a legend in Ohio, America. He is a great play caller, and 18 years since those words were spoken. The Browns are going to playoff. My kids were in elementary school, and not one had graduated from high school yet when they last went. I raised two Browns fans, two boys who are Browns fans, a nephew's a Browns fan, a brother-in-law who became a Browns fan. I'm responsible for much agony in many lives. And I've had season tickets for each of the seasons since they returned from exile in 1999. Fetching Mrs. Hewitt has always said, are we buying them again? And the answer is yes, this is the year. Now, they haven't had a playoff game at home yet, but things could work out. So that's the good news. Now we got to go to the bad news. Later today at the Washington Post, my op-ed will appear that suggests I would not vote to object to the certification. It argues, it doesn't suggest, it just says I would not vote for the objection. I would not object to the certification of electoral college votes, but neither is it a crisis that some people are going to do so. It just isn't. It's not a crisis. It's not a destruction of democracy, nor is the president's phone call to the Georgia Secretary of State a crime, an impeachable offense. It's a phone call in which you're going to hear it all. I'm going to play it all so you hear it on the Hugh Hewitt Show. I just want to tell you at the beginning, the TDS has taken so many people. Trump derangement syndrome has just infected so many people, especially in the media. They cannot separate a phone call pleading for a recount, imploring the Secretary of State to do something for a criminal act. It's not. It's being taped. It's just silly. It's like the Ukraine phone call. Just damn silly. But I want you to hear it. We'll also be joined by Salena Zito, Newt Gingrich, Lanhee, Chen, Josh Kraushaar, and, of course, Jerry Hendricks. But let's get started with the phone call. Let's get going on it. Cut number 14.
So, Mr. President, everybody is on the line, and just so this is Mark Meadows, the Chief of Staff, just so we all are aware, on the line is Secretary of State and two other individuals, Jordan and Mr. Germany. With him, you also have the attorneys that represent the president, Kurt and Alex, and Cleta Mitchell, who is not the attorney of record but has been involved, myself, and then the president. So, Mr. President, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Hello, Brad and Ryan and everybody. We appreciate the time and the call. So we've spent a lot of time on this, and if we could just go over some of the numbers, I think it's pretty clear that we won. We won very substantially, Georgia. You even see it by rally size, frankly. We'd be getting 25, 30,000 people a rally, and the competition would get less than 100 people, and it never made sense. But we have a number of things. We have at least two or three, anywhere from 250 to 300,000 ballots were dropped mysteriously into the rolls. Much of that had to do with Fulton County, which hasn't been checked. We think that if you check the signatures, a real check of the signatures going back in Fulton County, you'll find at least a couple of 100,000 of forged signatures of people with who have been forged, and we are quite sure that's going to happen. Another tremendous number. We're going to have an accurate number over the next 2 days with certified accountants, but an accurate number will be given, but it's in the 50s of thousands, and that's people that went to vote and they were told they can't vote because they've already been voted for. And it's a very sad thing. They walked out complaining, but the number is large. We'll have it for you, but it's much more than the number of 11,779. That's the current margin is only 11,779. Brad, I think you agree with that, right? That's something I think everyone, at least that's a number that everyone agrees on. But that's the difference in the votes. But we've had hundreds of thousands of ballots that we're able to actually, we'll get you a pretty accurate number. You don't need much of a number because the number that, in theory, I lost by the margin would be 11,779. But you also have substantial numbers of people, thousands and thousands, who went to the voting place on November 3rd, were told they couldn't vote. We're told they couldn't vote because a ballot had been put in on their name. And, that's very, 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 very sad. We had, I believe it's about 4,502 voters who voted, but who weren't on the voter registration list. So it's 4,502 who voted, but they were not on the voter registration roll, which they had to be. You had 18,325 vacant address voters. They had the address was vacant, and they're not allowed to be counted. That's 18,325. Smaller number, you had 904 who only voted where they had just a PO, a post office box number. And they had a post office box number, and that's not allowed. We had at least 18,000, that's on tape. We had them counted very painstakingly. 18,000 voters having to do with Ruby Freeman. She's a vote scammer, a professional vote scammer and hustler. Ruby Freeman. That was the tape that's been shown all over the world that makes everybody look bad. You, me, and everybody else, where they got.
All right, stop right there. We'll come back. I'm going to play the whole phone call. Why? Because you're going to see a lot of headlines that say the president committed an impeachable offense and he committed a crime. And you got to hear the whole phone call. And he didn't do any of those things. He was pleading for various remedies, none of which I would give him, by the way. I haven't seen any evidence of supporting any of this, but it's a phone call. Once again, the truth on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
The This is Lanhee Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The eyes of the political world are all on Georgia, and there's good reason for that. On January the 5th, voters in the Peach State will decide the fate of the next several years in American politics, and maybe beyond. A win by either or both of incumbent Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue will require President-elect Joe Biden and his liberal allies in Congress to work together with Republicans to pass common-sense legislation, rather than pursuing progressive priorities like the Green New Deal. And it will mean that some of Biden's more extreme appointments, people who either aren't qualified or who are far out of the mainstream, will be rejected by the Senate. The runoff elections on January the 5th will be held in Georgia, but their impact will be felt by more than the 10 million people who live there. All Americans should recognize that nothing short of the course our country will take for the next several years is at stake. I'm Lanhee Chen.
Considering a career in politics? Consider Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
Listen to what Joe Biden said about the actions like the one we saw last night in Minneapolis to literally defund the police.
But I also don't think we should get too far ahead of ourselves on dealing with police reform in that, because they've already labeled us as being defund the police. Anything we put forward in terms of the organizational structure to change policing, which I promise you will occur, promise you. Just think to yourself and give me advice whether we should do that before January 5th. Because that's how they beat the living hell out of us across the country, saying that we're talking about defunding the police. We're not. We're talking about holding them accountable.
Nothing screams holding them accountable better than stripping $8 million from the police department in Minneapolis, which, of course, will result in... Here's how this works. If you don't have funds for the police, if you funnel them into... mental health counselors, and good luck handling a raging, violent criminal. Good luck with that if you're a mental health counselor. Maybe you can sit there and start singing folk music to somebody who's, waving a machete around. Maybe you could go back and ask them if they wet the bed when they were a child as they're, on a rampage. Oh, we're not. But this is a very important clip from Biden. You've got to know exactly his intention.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
I don't love the fact that Congress is now getting involved in our elections. I don't. This is not something that I have great delight in. This is not something that should be taken lightly. Because as soon as you give the power of elections to a legislative branch, you almost become a parliamentary system. You lose the idea of a republic and a state-based republic as that. That's a very dangerous road to head on. However, unusual times call for unusual measures, and nothing that is being discussed right now in any way whatsoever is unconstitutional. Some people are going to be laying the criticism that this is an unconstitutional. No. It's unprecedented. Outside of the election of 1876, which we'll dive into as a kind of refresher course, as we've talked about here before, it definitely has not been done in the last 150 years, but it's not unconstitutional. Now, there is an argument to be made that Congress does not have this authority. That has not been decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm going to do that argument from a devil's advocate standpoint, but let's just go through the process. Just for all of you that are saying, I'm confused. What does a senator from Missouri have to do with election results from Pennsylvania? Fair question. Okay.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt. I will get back to the president's phone call shortly. I just got to remind my Atlanta audience, my other 12 markets in all across the Peach State, Georgia votes tomorrow. 3 million Georgians plus have already cast their ballots. Thank you, all of you conservatives. I think there's a huge uptick in Republicans who voted early, and I believe that we'll get out the vote. Some people are traditionalists. They want to get out the vote and vote on tomorrow. Going to be beautiful weather, which is great for Republicans. Lindsey Graham talked about why people needed to vote for David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler in a rally this weekend. The president, by the way, President Trump will be in Georgia today. Here's what Lindsey Graham had to say about the importance of these elections in Georgia, cut number 11.
January the 5th is going to determine the future of our country. If I had to pick one state other than South Carolina to make sure that America was in good hands, I'd pick Georgia. I know Georgia. I've been your neighbor all my life. My family, no joke, is literally from here. I know what makes you tick. I know what makes you passionate about our country. You're the people that fight the wars and pay the taxes. You're the people that go to church on Sunday and go to work on Monday. You're the strength of this country. Isn't that right, boys? So we've got a chance here in a few days to make sure that the most radical agenda in the history of American politics dies in the U.S. Senate. That anything coming out of Pelosi's house comes to the Senate and we kill it dead. How many of you go to church? Any Baptist here? We got more Baptists than people in South Carolina. Any Methodist? Yeah, that's a Baptist that can read. We got any Presbyterians? Y'all are predestined to be here. We're glad to have you. How many of you have ever thought about inviting Fidel Castro to your church? What kind of church is it that would invite Fidel Castro to come by and speak? Warnock is the most radical person to ever run for Senate in the history of Georgia. This is the most radical ideology we faced as a nation. Both Democratic nominees have drunk the Kool-Aid. They really believe, and they'll be in lockstep with the socialist agenda that's going to come out of the House. But we're going to kill it dead here in Georgia, aren't we?
Yes, we are. I believe that. I believe you're going to do it, Georgia. But if you have forgotten, Chuck Schumer told you explicitly why he wanted radicals Raphael Warnock and empty suit John Ossoff to win. Cut number 1.
Now we take Georgia, and then we change the world. Yeah! I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Mr. Schumer? Now we take Georgia, and then we change America.
The left wing of the Democratic Party wants Georgia to vote for radicals Warnock and empty suit Ossoff because it's just 2 votes for Chuck Schumer to work the radical left agenda that comes out of Pelosi's house, as Lindsey Graham said. Do not do it. Do not do it. Let me check the markets before we go back to the president's phone call in the next segment. On Friday, this was brought to you, by the way, by Birch Gold. Birch Gold is who you turn to when you want to buy gold and when you want to transfer a portion of your IRA or your 401k into physical precious metals-backed IRAs. So if you've got something in a mutual fund, you've got $5,000, and you want to put 500 of it into actual gold and physical silver, that's when you get to Birch Gold. And you get to Birch Gold by going to hughgold.com, hughgold.com, or you can call them at 888-888-1172. That's the wrong number. You don't call them. You text the name Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. Goodness, it's the first day of the new year. I'm a little foggy, 4 days off. Text the name Hugh to 474747 in Birch Gold, which is trusted around the country. They got thousands of 5-star reviews. They are very, very competent. I buy my gold from them. I buy physical gold and put it in my safety deposit box, which is what some of you like to do. But if you want to do the IRA thing or you want to buy gold, it's Birch Gold at hughgold.com. The market on Friday was, looking around. Dow went up 196 points. NASDAQ up 18, S&P up 24. It looks like the New Year's rally has begun. Birch Gold, time to go and get it. Gold is up to 1,939 this morning. Inflation is arriving. Stay tuned.
Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
I don't love the fact that Congress is now getting involved in our elections. I don't. This is not something that I have great delight in. This is not something that should be taken lightly. Because as soon as you give the power of elections to a legislative branch, you almost become a parliamentary system. You lose the idea of a republic and a state-based republic as that. That's a very dangerous road to head on. However, unusual times call for unusual measures, and nothing that is being discussed right now in any way whatsoever is unconstitutional. Some people are going to be laying the criticism that this is an unconstitutional. No. It's unprecedented. Outside of the election of 1876, which we'll dive into as a kind of refresher course, as we've talked about here before, it definitely has not been done in the last 150 years, but it's not unconstitutional. Now, there is an argument to be made that Congress does not have this authority. That has not been decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm going to do that argument from a devil's advocate standpoint, but let's just go through the process. Just for all of you that are saying, I'm confused. What does a senator from Missouri have to do with election results from Pennsylvania? Fair question. Okay. So when you vote on election day, you're not actually voting for president. You're voting for electors to go vote for president for you.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Rachel Maddow with her latest incarnation of clickbait of the televisual variety. Video cut 10.
We haven't seen somebody leave office since Nixon, who potentially was looking down the barrel of serious prosecution for multiple felonies. And Trump, CNN is reporting today that one of the people Trump's considering pardoning is not only himself, but Alan Weisselberg, who is the top financial guy at the Trump Organization. I mean, if the president pardons him, pardons the top financial guy at his own business on his way out of office, this is, it is worth contending anew with the threat to the republic of having a felon in the White House.
Right. Because a man whose son is in bed with communist China and who just willy-nilly emails requests for $10 million from Chinese tycoons, that's fine, right? And who are those sources who are talking to you about the pardons for members of the Trump organization? Are the same sources that sold you that we have his tax returns blockbuster?
Okay, I'm going to remind you when we get closer.
For 41 minutes, she teased the tax returns. Only then, in the last segment, she must be really in trouble if you have to tease something. Teasing something over one break, yeah, that's kind of like radio, TV. You do that. Stay tuned for. But to do it for your whole show, and then to reveal buckus, you got nothing? That's embarrassing, Rachel.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Lanhee Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The eyes of the political world are all on Georgia, and there's good reason for that. On January the 5th, voters in the Peach State will decide the fate of the next several years in American politics, and maybe beyond. A win by either or both of incumbent Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue will require President-elect Joe Biden and his liberal allies in Congress to work together with Republicans to pass common sense legislation, rather than pursuing progressive priorities like the Green New Deal. And it will mean that some of Biden's more extreme appointments, people who either aren't qualified or who are far out of the mainstream, will be rejected by the Senate. The runoff elections on January the 5th will be held in Georgia, but their impact will be felt by more than the 10 million people who live there. All Americans should recognize that nothing short of the course our country will take for the next several years is at stake. I'm Lanhee Chen.
Considering a career in politics? Consider Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
In fact, we are now ground zero of all the 50 states for COVID-19. What does that say?
Well, that's cases, Sage. That's cases. That's not illness. So right. California is number 40 in mortality, but we are number 1 in testing. So we do more testing than any other state. And so it's a very
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. So good to have you with me. Remember, Georgia, you got to vote tomorrow. Start making plans to go first thing in the morning and vote, vote, vote. I want to go back to President Trump's call yesterday with the Georgia Secretary of State so you'll hear the whole thing. Pick up where we left off.
Number one, they said very clearly, and it's been reported that they said there was a major water main break. Everybody fled the area. And then they came back, Ruby Friedman, her daughter, and a few people. There were no Republican poll watchers. Actually, there were no Democrat poll watchers. I guess they were them. But there were no Democrats either, and there was no law enforcement. Early in the morning, they went to the table with the black robe, the black shield, and they pulled out the votes. Those votes were put there a number of hours before. The table was put there. I think it was, Brad, you would know, it was probably 8 hours or 7 hours before, and then it was stuffed with votes. They weren't in an official voter box. They were in what looked to be suitcases or trunks, suitcases, but they weren't in voter boxes. The minimum number it could be, because we watched it and they watched it certified in slow motion, instant replay, if you can believe it, but it had slow motion and it was magnified many times over. And the minimum it was 18,000 ballots, all for Biden. You had out-of-state voters. They voted in Georgia, but they were from out of state, of 4,925. You had absentee ballot sent to vacant. They were absentee ballots sent to vacant addresses. They had nothing on them about addresses. That's 2,326. And you had drop boxes, which was very bad. You had drop boxes that were picked up. We have photographs and we have affidavits from many people. I don't know if you saw the hearings, but you have drop boxes where the box was picked up and not delivered for 3 days. So all sorts of things could have happened to that box, including, putting in the votes that you wanted. So there are many infractions, and the bottom line, it's many, many times the 11,779 margin that they said we lost by. We had the state is in turmoil over this, and I know you would like to get to the bottom of it, although I saw you on television today and you said that you found nothing wrong. I didn't lose the state, Fred. People have been saying that It was the highest vote ever. There was no way. A lot of the political people said that there's no way they beat me, and they beat me. They beat me in the poll. As you know, every single state, we won every state. We won every state house in the country. We held the Senate, which is shocking to people, although we'll see what happens tomorrow or in a few days. And we won the House, but we won every single state house, and we won Congress, which was supposed to lose 15 seats, and they gained, I think, 16 or 17 or something. I think there's now a difference of 5. There was supposed to be a difference substantially more. But politicians in every state, but politicians in Georgia have given affidavits and are going to that there was no way they beat me in the election, that the people came out. In fact, they were expecting to lose, and they ended up winning by a lot because of the coattails. And they said there's no way that they've done many polls prior to the election. There was no way that they won. Ballots were dropped in massive numbers, and we're trying to get to those numbers, and we will have them. They'll take a period of time, certified, but they're massive numbers and far greater than the 11,779. The other thing, dead people. So dead people voted, and I think the number is in the close to 5,000 people. And they went to obituaries. They went to all sorts of methods to come up with an accurate number, and a minimum is close to about 5,000 voters. The bottom line is when you add it all up, and then you start adding, 300,000 fake ballots. Then the other thing they said is in Fulton County and other areas, and this may or may not be true, this just came up this morning, that they are burning their ballots, that they are shredding ballots and removing equipment. They're changing the equipment on the Dominion machines. And, then that's not legal. And they supposedly shredded, I think they said 3,000 pounds of ballots. And that just came to us as a report today. And, it's a very sad situation. But Brad, if you took the minimum numbers were many, many times above the 11,779. And many of those numbers are certified, or they will be certified, but they are certified. Those are numbers that are there, that exist, and that beat the margin of loss. They beat it, by a lot. And people should be happy to have an accurate count instead of an election where there's turmoil. There's turmoil in Georgia and other places. You're not the only one. We have other states that I believe will be flipping to us very shortly. And but this is something that's as an example, I think in Detroit, and I think there's a good section of your state actually, which we're not sure, so we're not going to report it yet. But in Detroit, we had 139% of the people voted. That's not too good. In Pennsylvania, they had well over 200,000 more votes than they had people voting, and that doesn't play too well. And the legislature there which is Republican, is extremely activist and angry. But there were other things also that were almost as bad as that. But they had, as an example, in Michigan, a tremendous number of dead people that voted. I think Mark, it was 18,000, some unbelievably high number, much higher than yours. You were in the 4,000 to 5,000 category, and that was checked out laboriously by going through the obituary columns in the newspapers. So I guess with all of it being said, Brad, it's the bottom line. And provisional ballots, again, you'll have to tell me about the provisional ballots, but we have a lot of people that were complaining that they weren't able to vote because they were already voted for. And these are great people. And, they were shell-shocked. I don't know if you call that provisional ballots. In some states, we had a lot of provisional ballot situations where people were given a provisional ballot because when they walked in on November 3rd, they were already voted for. So that's it. I mean, we have many, many times the number of votes necessary to win the state, and we won the state. And we won it very substantially and easily, and we have much of this is very, they're certified. Far more certified than we need, but we're getting additional numbers certified too, and we're getting pictures of drop boxes being delivered and delivered late and delivered 3 days later in some cases. Plus, we have many affidavits to that effect.
So, Mr. President, if I might be able to jump in, and I'll give Brad a chance, Mr. Secretary, obviously.
So, if you're just joining, this is Mark Meadows.
There are allegations where we believe that not every vote or fair vote and legal vote was counted, and that's at odds with the representation from the Secretary of State's office. What I'm hopeful for is there some way that we can find some kind of an agreement to look at this a little bit more fully. The president mentioned Fulton County, but in some of these areas where there seems to be a difference of where the facts seem to lead. And so, Mr. Secretary, I was hopeful that, in a spirit of cooperation and compromises, there's something that we can at least have a discussion to look at some of these allegations to find a path forward that's less litigious.
Well, I've listened to what the president has just said. President Trump, we've had several lawsuits, and we've had to respond in court to the lawsuits and the contentions. We don't agree that you have one. I didn't agree about the 200,000 number that you mentioned, and I could go through that point by point. What we had done is we gave our state senate about 1.5 hours of our time going through the election issue by issue. And then on the state house, the government affairs committee, we gave them about 2.5 hours of our time, going back point by point on all the issues of contention. And then just a few days ago, we met with our U.S. congressman, Republican congressman, and we gave them about 2 hours of our time talking about this past election. Going back, primarily what you've talked about here, focused in on primarily, I believe, is the absentee ballot process. I don't believe that you're really questioning the Dominion machines, because we did a hand retally, a 100% retally of all the ballots, and compared that to what the machine said, and it came up with virtually the same result. Then we did the recount, and we got virtually the same result. So I guess we could probably take that off the table. I don't think there's an issue about that. I think what
Brad,
stop right there. I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to play the whole call so that you can make up your own mind. The headlines are ridiculous. There's no crime. There's no impeachable offense. It's a conversation between a candidate and a Secretary of State with observers about his complaints and his beliefs, which the Secretary of State does not accept. And that's all it is. This is Relief Factor. Boy, do I need it. Did 10 miles on Saturday down at the beach. Did 6 miles yesterday morning before the Browns game. Because, what else are you going to do before the Browns make the playoffs for the first time in 18 years, except walk and run? But, 16 miles in 2 days, a lot for a 64-year-old guy. A little bit barking of my knees today, but I take my relieffactor.com, as you should. You should take it every single day before you leave for work so that your commute does not work on your back, your lower back, your sciatica, whatever it is. Or if you've got minor aches and pains from putting away the Christmas tree, which Betsy, Mrs. Hewitt, and I did as well this weekend. If you've been lifting and pulling and you finally got everyone out of your house and you're alone but you're aching, relieffactor.com is for you, whatever your age. Whether you're a young athlete or just someone who's getting old and finding it harder to move, keep moving. It's the key, keep moving, and relieffactor.com helps you to do that. 1995. Longtime sponsor of the show, first ad of the new year. Let me tell you, great sponsor. You can trust him. Coming right back with Salena Zito on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
In fact, we are now ground zero of all the 50 states for COVID-19. What does that say?
Well, that's cases, Sage. That's cases. That's not illness. So
Right.
California is number 40 in mortality, but we are number 1 in testing. So we do more testing than any other state. And so it's a very, very different between cases and illness.
And the more you test, the more cases you get.
We're testing over 2 million people a day. Compare that to last March, April, May, where we were testing somewhere in the 200 to 300,000 range. Now we're testing 2 million. If the testing is, let's say, 2% false positives, 2% of a million, that's a lot of people that are testing positive but don't actually have the illness.
Mm-hmm. What does your gut tell you, Dr. Barkey, about the percentage of Americans who have already contracted the coronavirus? 5%, 10%, 20%? What do you think?
Oh, I think it's higher than that, because I'm seeing patients that were ill last year and pretty ill, and they come in and we do antibody testing and they're positive for that. I don't know what the actual number is, but I'd guess it's more in the 40% range. So this is really common. It's a respiratory illness, and what I mean by that is it's spread by respiratory droplets, primarily from people that are ill, that are coughing and sneezing. There is little evidence that there's much asymptomatic spread going on.
And when you're asymptomatic, of course, you don't know you are.
No, you don't. And, you know, the British Journal of Medicine recently reported evidence of asymptomatic spread is insufficient to justify mass testing for COVID-19, and I agree with them.
Mm-hmm.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Dennis Prager Show.
I asked you if you have been personally threatened. Is this a rare thing? Is this something that is somewhat constant?
It's for me, it's rare. I think everyone looks at me as this weird kind of cowboy. They know that I have a concealed carry. You know, I'll make that very, very plain and out there. I'm a gun enthusiast. So I get left alone, but I'm not really left alone. I do get threatened now and again, but I look around and look at what happened to MD and PhD Professor Tim Noakes, who tweeted one tweet, and this was in South Africa. They put him through a trial that cost the taxpayers there millions of dollars.
What did he tweet?
Won hands down.
What did he tweet?
He tweeted to a mother who had taken her kid off of breast milk, wanted to know if it was okay what she should feed him, and he said you should feed that kid meat and vegetables. And this was seen as a threat because he had mentioned meat. I know this sounds bizarre, and you might go, Vinny.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. No Yinzer report. I'm very sad to report. Salena just told radio blogger that she is ill. Too many bad pierogies during the Browns loss. I actually think it was probably the Browns loss. But she got an upset stomach. And so, Salena, look, the Browns won. They're going to win next week in your own city, and it's okay. You can't. I've dealt with it for years. Losing, it's a hard thing as the sun sets in Pittsburgh. WPIT listeners, I'm sorry, but WHK listeners in Cleveland and all of the land in northeastern Ohio are happy, as is my entire family. We are Warren people. And I just have to tell you, get used to it. But, Salena, feel better. Come back for the first injury report of the year later in the week. I really do mean that. Feel better. Let's go back to the president's phone call with the Secretary of State, Georgia. Georgia, remember, you vote tomorrow. You got to get out there and vote for Senators David Perdue and Senator Kelly Loeffler. There is a great editorial, which I've tweeted out from the Wall Street Journal, What's at Stake? Short version, everything. Everything is at stake. The American way of life and the American way of work and the American way of medicine and the American way of national security. It's all on the ballot because radicals John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock will drag this country so far to the left because they'll empower Chuck Schumer, and Chuck Schumer's from the left. Go back to the phone call about which there are many headlines, none of them justified. Return.
Brad, not that there's not an issue, but because we have a big issue with Dominion and other states, and perhaps in yours, but we haven't felt we needed to go there. And just to maybe put a little different spin on what Mark is saying, Mark Meadows. Yeah, we'd like to go further, but we don't really need to. We have all the votes we need. We won the state. If you took, these are the most minimal numbers, the numbers that I gave you. Those are numbers that are certified, your absentee ballots sent to vacant addresses, your out-of-state voters, 4,925. When you add them up, it's many times the 11,779 number. So we could go through, we have not gone through your Dominion, so we can't give them blessing. I mean, in other states, we think we found tremendous corruption with Dominion machines, but we'll have to see. But we only lost the state by by that number, 11,000 votes, and 779. So with that being said, with just what we have, and with just what we have, we're giving you minimal numbers. We're doing the most conservative numbers possible. We're many times above the margin. And so we don't really have to, Mark. I don't think we have to go through machines because what's the difference between winning the election by two votes and winning it by 500,000 votes? I think we probably did win it by 500,000. One of the things that happened, Brad, is we have other people coming in now from Alabama and from South Carolina and from other states, and they're saying it's impossible for you to have lost Georgia. We won, in Alabama, we set a record, got the highest vote ever. In Georgia, we set a record with a massive amount of votes. And they say it's not possible to have lost Georgia. And I could tell you by our rallies. I could tell you by the rally I'm having on Monday night, the place they already have lines of people standing out front waiting. It's just not possible to have lost Georgia. It's not possible. When I heard it was close, I said, there's no way. But they dropped a lot of votes in there late at night. You know that, Brad. And that's what we are working on very, very stringently. But regardless of those votes, with all of it being said, we lost by essentially 11,000 votes, and we have many more votes already calculated and certified too. So I just don't know, Mark, I don't know what's the purpose. I won't give Dominion a pass because we found too many bad things, but we don't need Dominion or anything else. We have won this election in Georgia based on all of this, and there's nothing wrong with saying that, Brad. Having a correct, the people of Georgia are angry, and these numbers are going to be repeated on Monday night, along with others that we're going to have by that time, which are much more substantial even, and the people of Georgia are angry. The people of the country are angry. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, that you've recalculated, because the 2,236 and absentee ballots, they're all exact numbers that were done by accounting firms, law firms, etc. And even if you cut them in half, and cut them in half again, it's more votes than we need.
Well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong. We talked to the congressmen, and they were surprised, but I guess there was a person named Mr. Raynard that came to these meetings and presented data. And he said that there was dead people, I believe it was upward of 5,000. The actual number were two people that were dead that voted. And so that's wrong. That was two.
Well, Cleta, how do you respond to that? You tell me.
Well, I will say, Mr. Secretary, one of the things that we have requested, and we didn't request it, what we said was... Hold on to
Cleta Mitchell. In fact, back it up a little bit during the break so we can get that for everyone. I'm playing the whole call. It's just simply not. I just thought the coverage of it reflects the TDS, which still has much of Beltway media in its cold grip. Hour 2 of the Hugh Hewitt Show, straight ahead.
trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
And it's kind of like I knew that I never would meet Billy Graham. I hoped to meet him all these years, but I never met him. And he was such a special man. So it amazes me whenever I talk to people who knew him personally the way you did. You know, I'm just in awe of that, because not only did you know him as a friend, he was your mentor as an evangelist. You are today doing what he did. You're doing gigantic crusades in stadiums. Obviously not recently because of the weird shutdown, but it's just I'm in awe of it because, as you just said, there's nobody like him. There was nobody like him. He was a unique figure in the 20th century.
It really was. And, you know, speaking of having dinner with him, I had lunch with him once. He was doing one of his crusades, and we went to the Red Lobster, or as Billy would have said, the Red Lobster, you know, lobster. But so we're sitting there, and, you know, Billy had a ball cap on. And here's the funny thing. While we're in town where Billy's doing a crusade, there was an atheist convention happening at the same time. So we're sitting at this table, and people recognize Billy, even though he has a ball cap pulled over his face. He had sort of that profile that looked like it belonged on Mount Rushmore, you know. And it's a funny thing. Here are these atheists who were impressed by Billy Graham. Oh, hello, Mr. Graham. And they're shaking his hand. And you can tell because they had the little name tag for the convention they were at. They were part of this atheist convention. He was so kind to them. And I just thought, this is how Jesus would be.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Lanhee Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The eyes of the political world are all on Georgia, and there's good reason for that. On January the 5th, voters in the Peach State will decide the fate of the next several years in American politics, and maybe beyond. A win by either or both of incumbent Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue will require President-elect Joe Biden and his liberal allies in Congress to work together with Republicans to pass common-sense legislation, rather than pursuing progressive priorities like the Green New Deal. And it will mean that some of Biden's more extreme appointments, people who either aren't qualified or who are far out of the mainstream, will be rejected by the Senate. The runoff elections on January the 5th will be held in Georgia, but their impact will be felt by more than the 10 million people who live there. All Americans should recognize that nothing short of the course our country will take for the next several years is at stake. I'm Lanhee Chen.
Considering a career in politics? Consider Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
So Richard Nixon in 1960, Thomas Jefferson in 1800, and the contested election of 1876 shows us that Congress really is the last line of interpretation and defense when it comes to contested elections. As I've said earlier in this program, this is not something I take lightly. This is not something that I think should become routine. But while we're at it, while we are talking about this, the Democrats are inevitably going to be saying this is unprecedented, this is an assault on the Constitution, this is wrong, this is terrible, how dare you? They're going to be screaming activists in the streets, activist media, and all we have to do is play Cut 29 over and over and over and over and over. Play tape.
Our very democracy depends, again, on the confidence of the American people in the integrity of our electoral system. So, my colleagues, please don't talk about this, about a conspiracy theory. It's not about that. It's not about conspiracy. It's about the Constitution of the United States.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Let's listen to Nicole Wallace, not just on the president, but on all Republicans. Video cut 11.
I think Republicans are concerned that there just might be a little shame injected into the political system again. Under Donald Trump, they could let people go without unemployment insurance because Donald Trump didn't care. Under Donald Trump, they could let people end up in food bank lines because he didn't care about programs to secure their. A lot of people have temporary economic crises that will be alleviated if we kill the virus and people can open up their businesses again. But Republicans don't feel pressure because of the suffering, because people have been suffering for many, many, many months. Republicans are afraid that we might reintroduce shame into the political ecosystem. And I think that what I detect in McConnell is relief. I don't think McConnell liked working with Donald Trump. I think he was craven enough to know that he could put whatever judges he wanted on the United States Supreme Court, just call Trump again and say, hey, do Gorsuch, do Kavanaugh next, and let's do a Hail Mary with the real right-wing lunatic. I mean, I don't think that Mitch McConnell has any distress or despair about working with Joe Biden.
That was Michael Steele, wasn't it? Chortling along. Mike, that was Michael Steele. This is incredible. They're lecturing us about shame, and the former chairman of the RNC is chortling along about that deranged woman's attack on all Republicans who said, for months and months and months, the president didn't care. You mean specifically the 5 months that Nancy has blocked the COVID relief package? Those 5 months, Nicole Wallace?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
What do you make of a city like Minneapolis, Minnesota, that slashed the police budget by millions of dollars last night? It was a unanimous vote. These kooks originally voted to abolish the police department altogether. I'm going to give you some numbers, because this is very real here in Georgia, too. How pro-police do you think Raphael Warnock is? How pro-police do you think John Ossoff is? How pro-police do you think today's Democrats are? In Minneapolis, where we have a lot of listeners, here are some numbers that I want to share with you. There have been 532 gunshot victims so far this year. 532. More than double the same period a year ago. Carjackings are up 331% from the same period last year. They've had hundreds of carjackings in the streets of Minneapolis. Violent crimes have surged to 5,100 crimes. And what did Minneapolis City Council do? Unanimously voted to slash the Minneapolis Police Department's budget by $8 million. Supposedly, they'll take the money and funnel it to other city services, including mental health teams and violence prevention programs, as they try to, quote, transform police.
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings, everyone listening to my 400-plus affiliates across this country in Canada and in Europe. There are many listeners, and I'm glad you are all here. It is the first live broadcast of 2021. It's an important broadcast, too, to remind the people of Georgia especially. Tomorrow is your vote. If you have not yet voted, you've got to turn out. More than 3 million of you voted early. I think that's a great number. I think a lot of Republicans who never voted before voted. I think it's silly, these analytics that say, well, more people voted in the Democratic-leaning district, so they probably have an edge. Nonsense. They have no idea. They don't have any idea who voted. None at all. There is no party registration. They cannot tell. People who might be alarmed by the approach of two radicals in the form of Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, who's more an empty suit than a radical, but he is on the payroll, or was on the payroll, of both Al Jazeera and the Chinese Communist Party. And Raphael Warnock's just as radical a man as possible. They will be turning out in ways that they have never turned out before. And tomorrow I'll pound the table, but I want to remind everyone what Chuck Schumer told the people of Georgia. Cut number 1.
Now we take Georgia, and then we change the world. Yeah! I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Mr. Schumer? Now we take Georgia, and then we change America.
Now, it's also an important week because the Congress is going to meet to certify the results that made Joe Biden the president-elect. There are going to be some objections to those results, just as were made in 2004 and 2016 by Democrats. I would not make such an objection if I were a representative or a senator, and I explain why in a future Washington Post column, which will post sometime today. It's all done. It was submitted yesterday afternoon, and the editing process is done, but they haven't put it up yet. And like Tom Cotton, who announced that last night he will not be voting, he will not be objecting, I just don't see it. I don't see the basis for an objection. But that summer objecting is not a threat to the Constitution. There's no danger of democracy collapsing. It's all silly. Just like it's silly to say that the president broke the law or impeachable offense. So many people inside the Beltway talk to each other on Twitter and they lose their minds. They lose their way. It's like Politico has lurched off the left cliff. Politico has become just a complete leftist brew. Today they declare there's a war inside the GOP. It's just absurd. It's stupid. And it's too bad. Politico used to be a good place that people could go and trust what they read, and now it isn't. That's why I've turned to Punchbowl News, which is the new operation by Jake Sherman and Anna Palmer. And Jake will be on tomorrow to talk about Punchbowl News. And I go to the Post. Well, I'll tell you, just for new listeners, I start with the Times of Israel, then the Financial Times and the Telegraph, then the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. Of course, I'm always on Twitter, and I do it for you. Now, however, I want to go to the phone call. I played a lot of it in the first hour. If you haven't heard it, I want to play the whole thing so you get it all. Back to the phone call. This is the president. You also hear Mark Meadows, Cleta Mitchell, the Secretary of State in Georgia, and his lawyer. Let's continue.
Requested, and we did. What we said was, and if you look at if you read our petition, it said that we took the names and birth years, and we had certain information available to us. We have asked from your office for records that only you have. And so we said there's a universe of people who have the same name and same birth year and died, but we don't have the records that you have. And one of the things that we have been suggesting formally and informally for weeks now is for you to make available to us the records that would be necessary to confirm.
But Cleta, even before you do that, Cleta, even before you do that, and not even including that, that's why I hardly even included that number, although in one state we have a tremendous amount of dead people, so I don't know. I'm sure we do in Georgia too. But is that we're so far ahead. We're so far ahead of these numbers. Even the phony ballots of known scammer. You know the internet? You know what was trending on the internet? Where's because they thought you'd be in jail. Where's it's crazy. It's crazy. That was the minimum number is 18,000, but they think it's probably about 56,000. But the minimum number is 18,000 on the night where she ran back in there when everybody was gone and stuffed. She stuffed the ballot boxes. Let's face it, Brad. I mean, they did it in slow motion replay, magnified, right? She stuffed the ballot boxes. They were stuffed like nobody's ever seen them stuffed before. So there's a term for it when it's a machine instead of a ballot box. But she stuffed the machine. She stuffed the ballot. Each ballot went 3 times. They were showing, here's ballot number 1. Here it is a second time, third time, next ballot. I mean, look, Brett, we have a new tape that we're going to release. It's devastating. And by the way, that one event, That one event is much more than the 11,000 votes that we're talking about. It's, that one event was a disaster. It's just, but it was something that it can't be disputed. And again, we have a version that you haven't seen, but it's magnified. It's magnified, and you can see everything. And she put, for some reason, they put it in 3 times each ballot, and I don't know why, but why? I don't know why 3 times. Why not 5 times, right? But yeah, go ahead.
You're talking about the State Farm video, and I think it's extremely unfortunate that Rudy Giuliani or his people, they sliced and diced that video and took it out of context. So the next day we brought in WSB TV and we let them see the full run of tape. And what you'll see, the events that transpired are nowhere near what was projected by,
But where were the poll watchers, Brad? There were no poll watchers there. There were no Democrats or Republicans. There was no security there. It was late in the evening, or early in the morning, and there was nobody else in the room. Where were the poll watchers? And why did they say a water main broke, which they did, and which is reported in the newspapers? They said they left, they ran out because of a water main break, and there was no water main. There was nothing. There was no break. There was no water main break. But if you take out everything, where were the Republican poll watchers? Even where were the Democrat poll watchers? Because there were none. And then you say, well, they left their station. If you look at the tape, and this was reviewed by professional police and detectives and other people. When they left in a rush, everybody left in a rush because of the water main, but everybody left in a rush. These people left their station. When they came back, they didn't go to their station. They went to the apron wrapped around the table, under which were thousands and thousands of ballots in a box that was not an official or a sealed box. And then they took those and they went back to a different station. So if they would have come back, they would have walked to their station and they would have continued to work. But they couldn't do even that because that's illegal because they had no Republican poll watchers. And remember, her reputation is devastating. She's known all over the internet, Brett. She's known all over. I'm telling you, where was one of the hot items on the. They knew her. Where's so, Brad? There can be no justification for that. And I give everybody the benefit of the doubt. But that was, and Brad, why did they put the votes in 3 times? They put them in 3 times.
Mr. President, they did not put that. We did an audit of that, and we proved conclusively that they were not scanned 3 times.
Well, where was everybody else at that late time in the morning? Where was everybody? Where were the Republicans? Where were the security guards? Where were the people that were there just a little while before when everyone ran out of the room? How come we had no security in the room? Why did they run to the bottom of the table? Why did they run there and just open the skirt and rip out the votes? I mean, Brad, and they were sitting there, I think for 5 hours or something like that, the votes. But they just all happened to run back and go, Brad. Come on.
Yeah, Mr. President, we'll send you the link from WSB that does.
I don't care about a link. I don't need it. I have a much better link.
I will tell you, I've seen the tape, the full tape. So has Alex. We've watched it. And what we saw and what we've confirmed in the timing is that they made everybody leave. We have sworn affidavits saying that. And then they began to process ballots. And our estimate is that there were roughly 18,000 ballots. We don't know that. If you know that.
There was 18,000 ballots, but they used each one 3 times.
Don't go anywhere, America. I'm playing you the whole call so that you know the media coverage of the call is just more Trump derangement syndrome. Stay tuned. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by Birch Gold Group.
This is Lanhee Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The eyes of the political world are all on Georgia, and there's good reason for that. On January the 5th, voters in the Peach State will decide the fate of the next several years in American politics, and maybe beyond. A win by either or both of incumbent Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue will require President-elect Joe Biden and his liberal allies in Congress to work together with Republicans to pass common-sense legislation, rather than pursuing progressive priorities like the Green New Deal. And it will mean that some of Biden's more extreme appointments, people who either aren't qualified or who are far out of the mainstream, will be rejected by the Senate. The runoff elections on January the 5th will be held in Georgia, but their impact will be felt by more than the 10 million people who live there. All Americans should recognize that nothing short of the course our country will take for the next several years is at stake. I'm Lanhee Chen.
Considering a career in politics? Consider Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
What's your current take on masks?
Current take on masks is they have very little efficacy. This has been studied over and over and over again in the past, but we ignore the past, and we put together anecdotal evidence now to support mask use. And I think to mask the healthy population is just not warranted scientifically. If you're ill and you're coughing and sneezing, certainly having a mask on can reduce the respiratory secretions that come out of your mouth and potentially spread. But to mask the healthy population, in my opinion, doesn't make sense.
I'm talking with Dr. Jeffrey Barkey. Dr. Barkey, literally hours ago, Joe Biden just gave a speech in which he pretty much trashed the Trump administration's response to the coronavirus. He ended the speech by saying, wear a mask.
Yeah. Well, I think he actually looks better in a mask, so it would be appropriate for him. You know, Sage, I heard you say earlier that there's a lot about the coronavirus and in particular this new coronavirus that has come out. And you're right, we don't know a lot about it. We have a lot to learn, but we do know a lot about some of our elected officials that are not basing their decisions on science. Our own governor in California, for example, that just announced there'll be an additional 3-week lockdown of our economy. There's no science to support that. I think it's wrong. It's tyrannical. It causes more harm than good.
Give me your take on these 2 vaccines, soon to be a 3rd vaccine. By what time do you think we will resume to something resembling normalcy?
That's a good question. Well, if we actually use the vaccines appropriately, I think it would be sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, we're not doing that.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
I don't know if we had anything to do with it, but here's a more bizarre. Dr. Kent Berry, right here in the good old United States. His building, his doctor's office, was burned to the ground. The fire marshals could not find how the fire was started. It was a very hot fire, and they burned his building to the ground. He wrote a book called Things Your Doctor Doesn't Want You to Know. He also advocates for meat and less sugar, less grains. If that's not bizarre enough, about 4 weeks after that fire, his home burned to the ground.
Oh my God.
They could not find anything. They couldn't find how it got started. The whole thing just incinerated. So if you think this is Vinny just being paranoid or goofy or anything else, I don't think so. I just gave you 3 wonderful examples of how this happens all the time.
I have 0 horses in this race. 0. But everything I read leads me to believe that meat is good for you. I have no great love of it. I don't dislike it. I'm neutral. But I do care about your health, and had you folks listened to me from the beginning about cars.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening. Back to the phone call. The phone call that the president made along with Mark Meadows, his lawyers, and Cleta Mitchell, a consultant of some sort, the Georgia Secretary of State and a Georgia lawyer, and someone in Georgia taped it and leaked it. I suppose that's legal, but there's nothing in it that is, they ought to advise the president, we're taping you and we're going to release that, because actually that would be the courteous thing to do to the commander-in-chief. But they didn't, but it doesn't matter. It's Trump being Trump. And it's not an impeachable offense. It's not the destruction of democracy. None of those things. Trump derangement syndrome is a hell of a drug. Back to the call.
I don't know about that, but I know.
Well, I do, because we had ours magnified out. So
but
each one magnified out
I've watched the entire
times 3. But you know, but nobody can make a case for that, Brett. Nobody. I mean, look, you'd have to be a child to think anything other than that. Just a child. I mean, you never Trump for U.S. attorney
how
there.
How many ballots, Mr. Secretary, are you saying that were processed in?
We had GPI thoroughly investigate that.
We had this is Ryan Germany. We had our law enforcement officers talk to everyone who was there after that event came to light. The GBI was with them as well as FBI agents.
Well, there's no way they could. Then they're incompetent. They're either dishonest or incompetent, okay? There's only 2 answers, dishonesty or incompetence. There's just no way. Look, there's no way. And on the other thing I said, too, there's no way. I mean, there's no way that these things could have been, you know, you have all these different people that voted, but they don't live in Georgia anymore. What was that number, Clay? That was a pretty good number, too. Yeah.
Well, the number who had registered out of state after they moved from Georgia. And so they had a date when they moved from Georgia. They registered to vote out of state, and then it's like 4,500. I don't have that right in front of me.
And then they came back in and they voted.
And voted. Yeah.
No, that was a large number, though. It was in the 20s. And, you know, the point
We've
is...
been going through each of those as well, and those numbers that we got, that Ms. Mitchell was just saying, they're not accurate. Everyone we've been through are people that lived in Georgia, moved to a different state, but then moved back to Georgia legitimately. And in many cases...
Really? How many people do that? You mean they moved out and then they said, the hell with it, I'll move back in? You know, it doesn't sound like a very normal... You mean they moved out, and what, they missed it so much that they wanted to move back in? Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, and they moved back in years ago. This was not like something just before the election. So there's something about that data that it's just not accurate.
Well, I don't know. All I know is that it is certified, and they moved out of Georgia, and they voted. It didn't say they moved back in, Clayton, did it?
No, but I mean, we're looking at the voter registry. Again, if you have additional records, we've been asking for that. But you haven't shared any of that with us. You just keep saying you've been...
But a lot of it you don't need to be shared. I mean, to be honest, they should share it. They should share it because you want to get to an honest election. I won this election by hundreds of thousands of votes. There's no way I lost Georgia. There's no way. We won by hundreds of thousands of votes. I'm just going by small numbers. When you add them up, they're many times the 11,000. But I won that state by hundreds of thousands of votes. Now, do you think it's possible that thousands of votes? Now, do you think it's possible that they shredded ballots in Fulton County? Because that's what the rumor is. And also that Dominion took out machines. That Dominion is really moving fast to get rid of their machinery. Do you know anything about that? Because that's illegal.
This is Ryan Germany. No, Dominion has not moved any machinery out of Fulton County. We're having.
Well, but have they moved? Have they moved the inner parts of the machines and replaced them with other parts?
No.
You sure, Ryan?
I'm sure, Mr. President.
And what about the ballots? The shredding of the ballots. Have they been shredding ballots?
No. The only investigation that we have into that, they have not been shredding any ballots. There was an issue in Cobb County where they were doing normal, office shredding, getting rid of old stuff.
Stay where you are, America. More of the phone call after the former Speaker, Newt Gingrich, joins me in the next segment of the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Don't forget to sign up for the Hughiverse. All of Hugh's broadcasts on demand, the after show, which in my opinion is worth the price all by itself, Dwayne FM, and all sorts of bonus content. www.hughiverse.com.
This is Lanhee Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The eyes of the political world are all on Georgia, and there's good reason for that. On January the 5th, voters in the Peach State will decide the fate of the next several years in American politics, and maybe beyond. A win by either or both of incumbent Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue will require President-elect Joe Biden and his liberal allies in Congress to work together with Republicans to pass common-sense legislation, rather than pursuing progressive priorities like the Green New Deal. And it will mean that some of Biden's more extreme appointments, people who either aren't qualified or who are far out of the mainstream, will be rejected by the Senate. The runoff elections on January the 5th will be held in Georgia, but their impact will be felt by more than the 10 million people who live there. All Americans should recognize that nothing short of the course our country will take for the next several years is at stake. I'm Lanhee Chen.
Considering a career in politics? Consider Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
Listen to what Joe Biden said about the actions like the one we saw last night in Minneapolis to literally defund the police.
But I also don't think we should get too far ahead of ourselves on dealing with police reform in that, because they've already labeled us as being defund the police. Anything we put forward in terms of the organizational structure to change policing, which I promise you will occur. Promise you. Just think to yourself and give me advice whether we should do that before January 5th, because that's how they beat the living hell out of us across the country, saying that we're talking about defunding the police. We're not. We're talking about holding them accountable.
Nothing screams holding them accountable better than stripping $8 million from the police department in Minneapolis, which of course will result in, here's how this works. If you don't have funds for the police, if you funnel them into, mental health counselors, and good luck handling a raging, violent criminal, good luck with that if you're a mental health counselor. Maybe you can sit there and start singing folk music to somebody who's, waving a machete around. Maybe you could go back and ask them if they wet the bed when they were a child as they're, on a rampage. Oh, we're not. But this is a very important clip from Biden. You've got to know exactly his intention.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
I don't love the fact that Congress is now getting involved in our elections. I don't. This is not something that I have great delight in. This is not something that should be taken lightly. Because as soon as you give the power of elections to a legislative branch, you almost become a parliamentary system. You lose the idea of a republic and a state-based republic as that. That's a very dangerous road to head on. However, unusual times call for unusual measures, and nothing that is being discussed right now in any way whatsoever is unconstitutional. Some people are going to be laying the criticism that this is an unconstitutional. No. It's unprecedented. Outside of the election of 1876, which we'll dive into as a kind of refresher course, as we've talked about here before, it definitely has not been done in the last 150 years, but it's not unconstitutional. Now, there is an argument to be made that Congress does not have this authority. That has not been decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm going to do that argument from a devil's advocate standpoint, but let's just go through the process. Just for all of you that are saying, I'm confused. What does a senator from Missouri have to do with election results from Pennsylvania? Fair question. Okay. So when you vote on Election Day, you're not actually voting for president. You're voting for electors to go vote for president for you.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Rachel Maddow with her latest incarnation of clickbait of the televisual variety. Video cut 10.
We haven't seen somebody leave office since Nixon, who potentially was looking down the barrel of serious prosecution for multiple felonies. And Trump CNN is reporting today that one of the people Trump's considering pardoning is not only himself, but Alan Weisselberg, who is the top financial guy at the Trump Organization. I mean, if the president pardons him, pardons the top financial guy at his own business on his way out of office, this is, it is worth contending anew.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined now by the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Newt Gingrich. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm great. I want to begin with the importance of the state's vote that you know so well. Georgia votes tomorrow. How important are these two races, and how do you feel about them?
Well, they're the most important runoff in American history. We've never before had two parallel Senate races with the potential to switch control of the Senate from conservative to radical. And both of the candidates on the Democratic side, Ossoff and Warnock, are radicals. Warnock's probably the most radical candidate ever nominated by a major party for the Senate. I personally think that we'll probably win, but it's a factor of two things.
Who will probably win, Mr. Speaker?
Well, when I say we, I've been a Republican my whole life. So.
Okay, I didn't hear you, so that's what I think. I think that Perdue and Loeffler will win, and you agree with that?
Yeah, but I think it's going to be a narrow margin, and I think it comes down to two things. Will all the conservatives turn out? And I would just say to them, you imagine on the 6th whether you're going to have Warnock and Ossoff working with the radicals against Trump, or you're going to have Loeffler and Perdue working with the Republicans and the conservatives. That's how gigantic it is. So if the conservatives turn out, and if the 8,000 poll watchers, the most ever organized, are able to block theft, then I think the Republicans will win. But it takes both, getting the vote out and getting the vote counted honestly.
Now, Mr. Speaker, what are the consequences of a President-elect Biden with a Democratic Senate as opposed to a President-elect Biden and a Republican-controlled Senate led by Mitch McConnell?
Well, I was in that position when I was Speaker and Bill Clinton was President, so I can tell you that if you have a leader of the other party, and particularly somebody who's as smart and as experienced as McConnell, everything from the appointments that get approved to the regulations, to the budget, to blocking tax increases, stopping any effort to pack the courts, I think you would find that a McConnell-led Republican Senate dramatically weakens the ability of the radicals to change America. One example of which we saw, of course, yesterday when one of the Democrats in the House ended the prayer with a man and a woman, which is linguistically so stupid you can't quite believe it. But that's just who they are. I mean, you might also notice, by the way, that the House rules involve gender security. They don't have anything to do with national security, but they've now outlawed, I think, 20-some terms like father, mother, brother, sister. This is the madness. And if the Senate was controlled by the radicals, then the whole government would just drift into a radicalism that would dramatically change this country in the next few years.
Yeah, I'm afraid that people don't understand what happens when you don't have oversight. And no oversight means no investigation into anything, no matter what happens. And that will be beyond the cuts to armed services, beyond judicial wildness being restrained. No oversight is a serious problem.
Look, I think every Georgian should simply ask themselves, do you really want Bernie Sanders to be chair of the Budget Committee? I mean, that is an example.
That's a good question. So, next question. President's phone call. What did you make of it?
Pretty dumb. He shouldn't have done it. It was, I mean, I've known Trump long enough and I've listened to him carefully enough. It was not particularly un-Trump. He's enormously frustrated with the Secretary of State in Georgia, as I am, frankly, and almost all Republicans are. And I think what you were hearing was the sound of very deep frustration. And I think, frankly, a bitter sense that in his own mind, he really does believe he won the election. And he really does believe that in states like Georgia was stolen.
Do you think Trump derangement syndrome is at play in the Beltway media? Do you think it's an impeachable offense what he did, or that a crime was committed?
No. Look, first of all, assuming for a moment that the establishment gets its will, on the 20th you're going to have Biden sworn in as president. So how could you possibly impeach Trump between now and the 20th?
Yeah, I'm just pointing out what Twitter said yesterday. I'll come back to that. Next question, Mr. Speaker. A number of members of the Senate will join scores of members of the House in objecting to the certification of the Electoral College's vote. I would not so object if I were a representative, but I am not one, nor have I ever been. Would you object if you were back in the House?
Yes, I would object, and I would object. First of all, Democrats objected to electors in 2001, 2005, and 2017. Now, at none occasion were they called out for somehow betraying the Constitution. So this malarkey that even some Republicans are repeating, oh, this is going to really weaken the Constitution. No, this is provided for in the Constitution. The Constitution provides that the House and Senate will examine the electors, and that the House and Senate, as they did in 1877, have the right to create a commission to review whether or not there was corruption, which in 1877 occurred in 3 specific states. And nobody thought that was a violation of the Constitution. It's frankly in the Federalist Papers explaining that you have got to be careful because the greatest danger to our republic is a foreign power controlling what they called the chief magistrate, the president. So they built all sorts of checks and balances in here, all of which have been weakened by the modern left and by the modern establishment, who began chanting as soon as they had Biden ahead. They began chanting, this is over, please go home and forget. Please. There's 74 million people who ignored 5 years of dishonest media and 5 years of dishonest internet giants and voted for Donald Trump, and a very large percent of them believe that there was corruption, there was fraud. They deserve at least a hearing. I mean, the vote is not a vote to defeat Biden. The vote's a vote to explore whether or not there was fraud and corruption.
So I understand that. We disagree. I'll explain my position in the Washington Post later today. But let me ask you, will a decision to vote object or not to object impact any would-be presidential candidates standing in the 2024 race, as has been argued again online?
Oh, I don't know. I think the people who are going to object tend to be very conservative, and the people who are going to vote no or who can refuse to object tend to be the establishment. But then you have some people who don't fit that at all.
Right. Tom Cotton is not going to object, and you can't get really.
Cotton is a very good example, and he issued a thoughtful statement of why he will not object. And we have to remember, the race for 2024 at most starts in January of 2023. There's a long way from here to there.
So do you think the phone call yesterday will have any impact on President Trump's viability as a 2024 return candidate?
No, I think Trump will have an effect on that. I mean, I've said publicly over and over, if he really wants to come back, he has to leave. David had to leave Israel and then come back as a conquering hero. De Gaulle had to leave France and then come back as a leader of the Free French. I don't think that Trump can stay as active, as vigorous, as constantly on Twitter and be viable in 2024.
Grover Cleveland had to withdraw to New York. Richard Nixon had to run for California governor and then withdraw to New York. Both of those individuals, the only two successful return candidates had to leave exactly as you were saying.
Right, right.
So let me talk to you a little bit about where we are politically. We have this never Trump rump, which is less than 1% of the GOP, but it's very loud on Twitter. It's very loud on television. Will any of the participants in the never Trump derangement syndrome, Trump derangement system, ever be viable as GOP influencers again?
Probably not, but you can't tell. Look, people forget this is a much more diverse party than the national press covers. We have the governor of Vermont, we have the governor of New Hampshire, we have the governor of Maine, and we have the governor of Maryland. I mean, those folks are not necessarily automatic Trump conservatives. So this is a big party in a big country, and I don't rule out anything for the next 4 years. I think we're about to head into chaos. I think Biden will prove to be astonishingly incapable of governing, and I think that Nancy Pelosi just proved by surviving by 2 votes that she has no muscle left. She has no ability to dominate the House. And in fact, in many ways, Kevin McCarthy will be the practical leader of the House while she's still nominally the Speaker. So there are a lot of things coming down the road. I've been at this since August of 1958, and I would say the next 4 years are as wide open and as confusing as anything I've seen in my entire career.
You know, I have to disagree with you one more time, Mr. Speaker. I think if someone was vocally, consistently, thoughtlessly never Trump and never found anything to say good, even after his 3 Supreme Court nominations and confirmation, that they're out of the party. They might not know it, but they'll never be back at CPAC, the Western Conservative Summit, Turning Point USA, or a Republican National Convention as an invited guest. They might be there with the media doing their media thing, but they're out.
Oh, it's okay. I mean, the way you phrase it now, I would accept that. I don't expect to see Bill Kristol being invited to some Republican event.
Okay, so we're actually not in disagreement. Last question. How important is it that everybody in Georgia turn out tomorrow? You know Georgia very, very well, whether they're in Atlanta, whether they're in Macon, whether they're in Savannah, whether they're in North or South Georgia. What do you think?
I think it's unbelievably important. I am confident that if every conservative votes, and if the 8,000 poll workers can keep a close eye on the count, that we will win. We'll probably win by a narrow margin, maybe 51-49. But I think we'll win both seats. But that means Georgians have to get out and vote, period.
Mr. Speaker, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for joining me. I'll talk to you again soon. Always adding illumination to unusually opaque stories. Let me add to you, friends, that it's time to remind you of this, ReliefFactor.com. I took it in the first hour. I take it every day. Did my 10 miles on Saturday down at Huntington Beach. I'm in California for my January month, and I love California in January. Much better than Virginia any other time, but it's a long, slow, steady run made possible by ReliefFactor.com. Did 11,002 miles of, no, 11,000, goodness, no, 1,102 miles of trundling. Now, trundling isn't running. It's not going to set any world records. Trundling is running and walking and keeping up a good pace, but getting the heart rate up, and you need to do that. If you're going to stay healthy for the long haul, you've got to be out there moving. As Tim Cook of Apple said, we will learn this century that immobility is the new cancer. You just got to move, and if you haven't moved in a long time, start today, 100 yards, 100 feet, whatever it is, and bring it up a little bit every day. ReliefFactor.com will help you with the minor aches and pains that accompany that. Temporary support for the relief of those minor aches and pains. And let me also say, for a New Year's resolution, honorboundcoffee.com. All one word, honorboundcoffee.com. If you drink coffee, as I do, you ought to subscribe to it. It will be delivered to your door. You never have to go to Costco or Trader Joe's or any market again. You just get great coffee, and 100% of the profits from honorboundcoffee.com go to support military families. The military families are taking care of you as well as their families every single day. Mom or dad who is at home during a deployment is doing so much for this country, just as much as the spouse is doing for this country, by tending for everything. So please, Honor Bound Coffee does support the troops in real ways with Injured Marine Semper Fi Fund and America's Fund and so many other groups. Get out there and go to work. Thank you so much for doing just that. Don't go anywhere, America. Coming right back with more of the president's phone calls so you can hear it for yourself when we return to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
This is Lanhee Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The eyes of the political world are all on Georgia, and there's good reason for that. On January the 5th, voters in the Peach State will decide the fate of the next several years in American politics, and maybe beyond. A win by either or both of incumbent Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue will require President-elect Joe Biden and his liberal allies in Congress to work together with Republicans to pass common-sense legislation, rather than pursuing progressive priorities like the Green New Deal. And it will mean that some of Biden's more extreme appointments, people who either aren't qualified or who are far out of the mainstream, will be rejected by the Senate. The runoff elections on January the 5th will be held in Georgia, but their impact will be felt by more than the 10 million people who live there. All Americans should recognize that nothing short of the course our country will take for the next several years is at stake. I'm Lanhee Chen.
Considering a career in politics? Consider Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
In fact, we are now ground zero of all the 50 states for COVID-19. What does that say?
Well, that's cases, Sage. That's cases. That's not illness. So right. California is number 40 in mortality, but we are number 1 in testing. So we do more testing than any other state. And so it's a very, very different between cases and illness.
And the more you test, the more cases you get.
We're testing over 2 million people a day. Compare that to last March, April, May, where we were testing somewhere in the 200 to 300,000 range. Now we're testing 2 million. If the testing is, let's say, 2% false positives, 2% of a million, that's a lot of people that are testing positive but don't actually have the illness.
Mm-hmm. What does your gut tell you, Dr. Barkey, about the percentage of Americans who have already contracted the coronavirus? 5%, 10%, 20%? What do you think?
Oh, I think it's higher than that, because I'm seeing patients that were ill last year and pretty ill, and they come in and we do antibody testing and they're positive for that. I don't know what the actual number is, but I'd guess it's more in the 40% range. So this is really common. It's a respiratory illness, and what I mean by that is it's spread by respiratory droplets, primarily from people that are ill, that are coughing and sneezing. There is little evidence that there's much asymptomatic spread going on.
And when you're asymptomatic, of course, you don't know you are.
No, you don't. And, you know, the British Journal of Medicine recently reported evidence of asymptomatic spread is insufficient to justify mass testing for COVID-19, and I agree with them.
Mm-hmm. Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt. It is time to continue with listening to the president's phone call with the Georgia Secretary of State. Other voices are Mark Meadows, Cleta Mitchell. They're both on the president's team, and the Secretary of State of Georgia and his lawyer. Back to
investigated that, but this is stuff from past elections.
No, I don't know.
That's what
it doesn't pass the smell test, though, because we hear they're shredding thousands and thousands of ballots. And now what they're saying, we're just cleaning up the office. I don't think that plays.
Well, Mr. President, the problem you have with social media, people can say anything.
No, this isn't social media. This is Trump media. It's not social media. It's really not. It's not social media. I don't care about social. But I couldn't care less. Social media is big tech. Big tech is on your side. I don't even know why you have a side, because you should want to have an accurate election. And you're a Republican.
We believe that we do have an accurate election.
No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't have. Not even close. You're off by hundreds of thousands of votes, and just on the small numbers, you're off on these numbers. And these numbers can't be just. Well, why won't? Okay, so you send us into Cobb County for signature verification, right? You send us into Cobb County, which we didn't want to go into, and you said it would be open to the public and we could have so we had our experts there. They weren't allowed into the room. But we didn't want Cobb County. We wanted Fulton County, and you wouldn't give it to us. Now, why aren't we doing signature, and why can't it be open to the public, and why can't we have professionals do it instead of rank amateurs that will never find anything and don't want to find anything? They don't want to find, they don't want to find anything. Someday you'll tell me the reason why, because I don't understand your reasoning, but someday you'll tell me the reason why. But why don't you want to find?
We chose Cobb County.
Why don't you want to find? What?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so why did you do Cobb County? We didn't even we requested Fulton County, not Cobb County.
Well, Mr. President, we did have our
Cobb
election
County.
contest.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
We chose Cobb County because that was the only county where there's been any evidence submitted that the signature verification was not properly done.
Well, no, but I told you, but we're not saying that. We did say that. We're the aggrieved party. Fulton County, look, Stacey, in my opinion, Stacey is as dishonest as they come. She has outplayed you at every heart, at everything. She got you to sign a totally unconstitutional agreement, which is a disastrous agreement. You can't check signatures. You can't do that. I can't imagine you're allowed to do harvesting, I guess, in that agreement. That agreement is a disaster for this country. But she got you somehow to sign that thing, and she's outsmarted you at every step. And I hate to imagine what's going to happen on Monday or Tuesday, but it's very scary to people, where the ballots flow in out of nowhere. It's very scary to people. That consent decree is a disaster. It's a disaster. A very good lawyer who examined it said they've never seen anything like it. And
harvesting is still illegal in the state of Georgia, and that settlement agreement did not change that.
Well, it's not a settlement agreement. It's a consent decree. It even says consent decree on it, doesn't it? It uses the term consent decree. It doesn't say settlement agreement. It's a consent decree. It's a disaster.
It's a settlement agreement.
What's written on top of it?
Ryan?
I don't have it in front of me, but it was not entered by the court. It's not a court order.
No, it's called. But Ryan, it's called the consent decree. Is that right on the paper? Is that right?
I don't believe so. But I don't have it in front of me.
Okay. Whatever. It's a disaster. It's a disaster. Look, here's the problem. We can go through signature verification, and we'll find hundreds of thousands of signatures if you let us do it. And the only way you can do it, as you know, is to go to the past. But you didn't do that in Cobb County. You just looked at one page compared to another. The only way you can do a signature verification is go from the one that signed it on November, whatever, recently, and compare it to 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago, or even one. And you'll find that you have many different signatures. But in Fulton, where they dumped ballots, you will find that you have many that aren't even signed, and you have many that are forgeries, okay? You know that. You know that. You have no doubt about that. And you will find you will be at 11,779 within minutes, because Fulton County is totally corrupt, and so is she totally corrupt. And they're going around playing you and laughing at you behind your back, Brad. Whether you know it or not, they're laughing at you. And you've taken a state that's a Republican state, and you've made it almost impossible for a Republican to win because of cheating, because they cheated like nobody's ever cheated before. And I don't care how long it takes me. We're going to have other states coming forward pretty good. But I won't. This is never given. We have some incredible talent. Said they've never seen anything. Now the problem is they need.
This is the president's phone call. I might be able to finish it, but I got some great guests next hour. Stay tuned, America. It's the Hugh Hewitt Show.
trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
And it's kind of like I knew that I never would meet Billy Graham. I hoped to meet him all these years, but I never met him. And he was such a special man. So it amazes me whenever I talk to people who knew him personally the way you did. You know, I'm just in awe of that, because not only did you know him as a friend, he was your mentor as an evangelist. You are today doing what he did. You're doing gigantic crusades in stadiums. Obviously not recently because of the weird shutdown, but it's just I'm in awe of it because, as you just said, there's nobody like him. There was nobody like him. He was a unique figure in the 20th century.
It really was. And, you know, speaking of having dinner with him, I had lunch with him once. He was doing one of his crusades, and we went to the Red Lobster, or as Billy would have said, the Red Lobster, you know, lobster. But so we're sitting there, and, you know, Billy had a ball cap on. And here's the funny thing. While we're in town where Billy's doing a crusade, there was an atheist convention happening at the same time. So we're sitting at this table, and people recognize Billy, even though he has a ball cap pulled over his face. He had sort of that profile that looked like it belonged on Mount Rushmore, you know. And it's a funny thing. Here are these atheists who were impressed by Billy Graham. Oh, hello, Mr. Graham. And they're shaking his hand. And you could tell because they had the little name tag for the convention they were at. They were part of this atheist convention. He was so kind to them. And I just thought, this is how Jesus would be.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Lanhee Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The eyes of the political world are all on Georgia, and there's good reason for that. On January the 5th, voters in the Peach State will decide the fate of the next several years in American politics, and maybe beyond. A win by either or both of incumbent Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue will require President-elect Joe Biden and his liberal allies in Congress to work together with Republicans to pass common-sense legislation, rather than pursuing progressive priorities like the Green New Deal. And it will mean that some of Biden's more extreme appointments, people who either aren't qualified or who are far out of the mainstream, will be rejected by the Senate. The runoff elections on January the 5th will be held in Georgia, but their impact will be felt by more than the 10 million people who live there. All Americans should recognize that nothing short of the course our country will take for the next several years is at stake. I'm Lanhee Chen.
Considering a career in politics? Consider Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
So Richard Nixon in 1960, Thomas Jefferson in 1800, and the contested election of 1876 shows us that Congress really is the last line of interpretation and defense when it comes to contested elections. As I've said earlier in this program, this is not something I take lightly. This is not something that I think should become routine. But while we're at it, while we are talking about this, the Democrats are inevitably going to be saying this is unprecedented, this is an assault on the Constitution, this is wrong, this is terrible, how dare you? They're going to be screaming activists in the streets, activist media, and all we have to do is play Cut 29 over and over and over and over and over. Play tape.
Our very democracy depends, again, on the confidence of the American people in the integrity of our electoral system. So, my colleagues, please don't talk about this, about a conspiracy theory. It's not about that. It's not about conspiracy. It's about the Constitution of the United States.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Let's listen to Nicole Wallace, not just on the president, but on all Republicans. Video cut 11.
I think Republicans are concerned that there just might be a little shame injected into the political system again. Under Donald Trump, they could let people go without unemployment insurance because Donald Trump didn't care. Under Donald Trump, they could let people end up in food bank lines because he didn't care about programs to secure their. A lot of people have temporary economic crises that will be alleviated if we kill the virus and people can open up their businesses again. But Republicans don't feel pressure because of the suffering, because people have been suffering for many, many, many months. Republicans are afraid that we might reintroduce shame into the political ecosystem. And I think that what I detect in McConnell is relief. I don't think McConnell liked working with Donald Trump. I think he was craven enough to know that he could put whatever judges he wanted on the United States Supreme Court, just call Trump again and say, hey, do Gorsuch, do Kavanaugh next, and let's do a Hail Mary with the real right-wing lunatic. I mean, I don't think that Mitch McConnell has any distress or despair about working with Joe Biden.
That was Michael Steele, wasn't it? Chortling along. Mike, that was Michael Steele. This is incredible. They're lecturing us about shame, and the former chairman of the RNC is chortling along about that deranged woman's attack on all Republicans who said, for months and months and months, the president didn't care. You mean specifically the 5 months that Nancy has blocked the COVID relief package? Those 5 months, Nicole Wallace?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
What do you make of a city like Minneapolis, Minnesota, that slashed the police budget by millions of dollars last night? It was a unanimous vote. These kooks originally voted to abolish the police department altogether. I'm going to give you some numbers, because this is very real here in Georgia, too. How pro-police do you think Raphael Warnock is? How pro-police do you think John Ossoff is? How pro-police do you think today's Democrats are? In Minneapolis, where we have a lot of listeners, here are some numbers that I want to share with you. There have been 532 gunshot victims so far this year. 532. More than double the same period a year ago. Carjackings are up 331% from the same period last year. They've had hundreds of carjackings in the streets of Minneapolis. Violent crimes have surged to 5,100 crimes. And what did Minneapolis City Council do? Unanimously voted to slash the Minneapolis Police Department's budget by $8 million. Supposedly, they'll take the money and funnel it to other city services, including mental health teams and violence prevention programs, as they try to
Morning, Glory America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt bringing you this first live broadcast of the new year. And I begin with reminding everyone in Georgia, you got to vote tomorrow, and you got to vote because Chuck Schumer said this. Cut number one.
Now we take Georgia, and then we change the world. Yeah! I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Mr. Schumer? Now we take Georgia, and then we change America.
What that means is now the subject of discussion between me and Lanhee Chen, the David and Diane Steffy Fellow at the Hoover Institution, longtime friend and guest fellow member of the Salem Media Editorial Board. Good morning, Lanhee. How are you?
Hey, Hugh, good morning. Congratulations on the Browns.
I know. We're in the playoffs for the first time in 18 years. I wanted to devote the whole show to it, but there is this election tomorrow. I just had Newt Gingrich on. He talked about how important it is. You're a policy guy, Lanhee. In terms of the policies the United States will adopt or not adopt, how important are those races tomorrow in Georgia?
Oh, they're absolutely, if their importance is unparalleled. I mean, if you think about the scope of policy change potentially over the next couple of years, I mean, you look at healthcare policy, energy policy, financial regulatory policy, tax policy, the direction the country goes in, if you have a Biden presidency plus a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate, is radically different from if you have Republicans in control of the Senate able to provide that emergency brake, that check to make sure we do not go too far in a progressive direction. It is extremely important, and not just with respect to policy, Hugh. Also, if you think about appointments, if you think about the kinds of people that end up in the judiciary, the kinds of people that end up in the executive branch, the Senate plays a crucial role in ensuring that there is some check on the far progressive left. And you have to have that. You just have to have that, given that we will have a Democratic president in just a few weeks here. So these elections in Georgia are crucial.
Now, President-elect Biden is going to be given a list of judges by the senators of his party and by his staff. And whether or not Mitch McConnell controls the floor will figure, I believe, dramatically in who he selects from that list. Do you agree with me?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, look, the legacy of the last couple of years of the Senate's activity on judges, I think we're going to be talking about for generations to come. I mean, it's absolutely incredible what Mitch McConnell did to ensure that this was the focus. Regardless of all the noise in Washington, all the political distractions, Mitch McConnell's focus has been ensuring the federal judiciary is filled with judges who respect the rule of law. Going forward, it's going to be absolutely significant for Mitch McConnell to continue to have control of the floor, to ensure that the judges that come through, look, these are not going to be judges that would be appointed necessarily by someone like President Trump. But hopefully with a Republican Senate, you will see judges who at least have some modicum of respect for things like the rule of law, things like ensuring that they don't go too far. Mitch McConnell is going to be the key to that, which is why Republican control of the Senate, these Georgia Senate races, are absolutely key.
And so if David Perdue or Kelly Loeffler, and preferably both of them, win, we can count on judges coming from the Democratic side who are, if not in agreement with Lanhee, Chen, and I about how a ruling ought to be done, will follow known procedures and will not be results driven. Lanhee, let's talk about defense first, because I believe national security implications of these two votes are extraordinary. I don't think people even begin to grasp how important these two seats are for protecting the United States. How would you articulate that?
Well, there's a few factors. First of all, there is the question of what the priorities of the Senate will be. And given Republican control over the last couple of years, what we have seen, for example, is a much more significant push to hold China accountable, to ensure that people understand all of the malign actions that China has taken and will continue to take, frankly, in their quest to continue to be a more and more significant player on the world stage. That is something that the Republican Senate has helped bring to light. That will continue to be an important factor if the Republican Senate remains a reality. On defense, you have finally in the Republican-controlled Senate, you have in the Senate a conversation about the value and the importance of more significant investment in our military, of a more significant investment in technology, as well as in the right approach when it comes to our Navy, to our Army, to our Air Force. These are the sorts of things that you have with a Republican Senate that you would not have had if you had control falling to the other side. So it's not just about the actual things the Senate does. It's about agenda control. And what are the things the Senate is talking about? And these are the kinds of factors that with Republican control you will have with the victory of Kelly Loeffler, David Perdue, hopefully both of them, as you say, but just one of them wins. You have the Republicans controlling the Senate. You will ensure that the national security conversation remains headed in the right direction coming out of the Congress.
Now, Senator Perdue in particular is a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee and on the Sea Power Subcommittee, which he chairs. And I'm going to have Jerry Hendricks on at the bottom of the hour. Captain Hendricks has just written a new book, To Provide and Maintain a Navy, which says, we got to get to 355, and it's got to be a particular ship mix. Georgia's a pretty military state, so I think the military vote will favor Perdue and Loeffler decidedly. But how important is it that just the top line spending number not be dramatically cut as it was under President Obama? And there it went beyond even the Gates budget.
Yeah, that is going to be significant. And here again, it is important because if you don't have a Republican-controlled Senate, it is going to be very easy to sweep a lot of this under the rug. And this is what we saw during the Obama era, for people to come out and essentially poo-poo the notion that you had to pay attention to how much we were investing and how much we were spending. You'll recall, for example, the quip that President Obama had about during the debates with Mitt Romney in 2012, when he was making fun of the notion that the number of ships mattered, that the investment we were making in the U.S. Navy and the U.S. military mattered. All of that sort of stuff, all of that kind of mindset begins to creep back in if you don't have a Senate keeping those thoughts in check, quite frankly. And so this sort of conversation that we're having now, Hugh, that we're having because the last couple of years we have invested more in our military, we have invested more in the Navy, we have made these dramatic investments because of the leadership of people like Robert O'Brien, like Mike Pompeo. These sorts of conversations, look, we can't expect the same kinds of conversations to be happening given that it's going to be a different administration. But having a Republican Senate just ensures that you've got people that are keeping an eye on things and minding the store. Because without that, we could potentially be headed for a situation where those who believe that not investing in our military, not having the most modern technology, those forces are again ascending, and I don't want to see that.
So my last question, Lanhee Chen, divided government ensures oversight because you have some Senate committees digging in where digging in is necessary. It also assures that in places like healthcare, which was the first thing you mentioned, and immigration policy, the moderate choice becomes the choice that is necessary when it comes to reform, even on something like a budget resolution, even on something that simple. And the Congressional Review Act cannot be invoked to repeal Trumpian-era regulation. It matters up and down the line.
Yeah, healthcare is a big one. I mean, this is an area where we're talking about the difference between moving toward a government-run single-payer healthcare, which, look, let's just be very frank about this. The progressive left has made clear that is their intention, to move towards single-payer government-run healthcare. Public option-style proposals move us in that direction. Having a Republican Senate ensures that movement just doesn't happen. It can't happen. On regulation, this is key. We've done a ton of deregulation over the last couple of years to free up the economy, to get the economy growing. If you have a Democratic-controlled Senate with a Democratic-controlled House, a lot of that deregulatory activity coming out of the Trump administration the last couple of years, that can be overturned. The stakes are extremely high when you think about these domestic policy areas, and people need to recognize this is more than just about two seats in Georgia. This really is, as these Democrats are saying, this really is about the future of our country and ensuring that the policy direction continues to move in the right direction rather than the wrong one.
And people forget when Donald Trump won and there was unified government, the Congressional Review Act kicked in and we threw out so many rules of the Obama administration. If they can go back for, I believe, a year of legislative days and just repeal regulations left and right by simple majority vote, Lanhee.
Well, right, that's right. I mean, the Congressional Review Act is an extremely powerful tool. Republicans used it to their advantage to ensure that some of that regulatory overreach from the Obama administration toward the end was addressed. And the tables can be turned. Look, if Democrats have control of the Senate and the House, they can do the same thing to Trump efforts to deregulate. So you have that going in the opposite direction. So it's a very powerful tool that all they need is a simple majority. They don't need a huge majority, just a simple one.
And that is why, Georgia, if you're listening, David Perdue, Kelly Loeffler, you got to get out and vote tomorrow. Lanhee Chen of the Hoover Institution. Thank you, Lanhee. I'll be right back. America Market Update ahead. And I'll be joined by Jerry Hendricks, Captain Jerry Hendricks, and Josh Kraushaar as the show continues. Stay with us.
Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
So Richard Nixon in 1960, Thomas Jefferson in 1800, and the contested election of 1876 shows us that Congress really is the last line of interpretation and defense when it comes to contested elections. As I've said earlier in this program, this is not something I take lightly. This is not something that I think should become routine. But while we're at it, while we are talking about this, the Democrats are inevitably going to be saying this is unprecedented, this is an assault on the Constitution, this is wrong, this is terrible, how dare you? They're going to be screaming activists in the streets, activist media, and all we have to do is play Cut 29 over and over and over and over and over. Play tape.
Our very democracy depends, again, on the confidence of the American people in the integrity of our electoral system. So, my colleagues, please don't talk about this, about a conspiracy theory. It's not about that. It's not about conspiracy. It's about the Constitution of the United States.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Let's listen to Nicole Wallace, not just on the president, but on all Republicans. Video cut 11.
I think Republicans are concerned that there just might be a little shame injected into the political system again. Under Donald Trump, they could let people go without unemployment insurance because Donald Trump didn't care. Under Donald Trump, they could let people end up in food bank lines because he didn't care about programs to secure their... A lot of people have temporary economic crises that will be alleviated if we kill the virus and people can open up their businesses again. But Republicans don't feel pressure because of the suffering, because people have been suffering for many, many, many months. Republicans are afraid that we might reintroduce shame into the political ecosystem. And I think that what I detect in McConnell is relief. I don't think McConnell liked working with Donald Trump. I think he was craven enough to know that he could put whatever judges he wanted on the United States Supreme Court, just call Don McGahn and say, hey, do Gorsuch, do Kavanaugh next, and let's do a Hail Mary with the real right-wing lunatic. I mean, I don't think that Mitch McConnell has any distress or despair about working with Joe Biden.
That was Michael Steele, wasn't it? Chortling along. Mike, that was Michael Steele. This is incredible. They're lecturing us about shame, and the former chairman of the RNC is chortling along about that deranged woman's attack on all Republicans who said for months and months and months the president didn't care. You mean specifically the 5 months that Nancy has blocked the COVID relief package? Those 5 months, Nicole Wallace?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
What do you make of a city like Minneapolis, Minnesota, that slashed the police budget by millions of dollars last night? It was a unanimous vote. These kooks originally voted to abolish the police department altogether. I'm going to give you some numbers, because this is very real here in Georgia, too. How pro-police do you think Raphael Warnock is? How pro-police do you think John Ossoff is? How pro-police do you think today's Democrats are? In Minneapolis, where we have a lot of listeners,
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening. Let me check the markets for a couple of reasons. One, when I did the market update in the first hour, I hadn't really noticed how much gold has shot up. And Birch Gold, which is a sponsor of this program, I need to tell you, I've been telling you when it was down in 1,600 and 1,700, just buckle up, because I think inflation is coming. And you have to go to hughgold.com or text my name, Hugh, to 474747, because I look at this and I see gold this morning is up 2.21% at 1937. It was down in the low 1800s very recently, and I think that is a sign of what is ahead for this year. So get your physical metals IRA started, buy some gold, whatever. That's my caution to you. Now let me talk to you people who are thinking about buying or refinancing a home. The 10-year Treasury is still at 0.92% this morning. That means Andrew and Todd.com are still busy. They work through the holidays. They are working like the end of the world is tomorrow, because it will be for their would-be customers who want to refinance or buy a home when the interest rates are this low. And they know inflation can only be held at bay for so long. They know that the 10-year Treasury can only stay below 1% for so long. And right now is the time. If you're going to buy a house in 2021, buy it now. Get a pre-qualification letter. If you're going to refinance to get money to get you through the after effects of COVID or to help your kids go to college next year, borrow it now. They even have financial advisors, Andrew Del Rey and Todd Avakian. I've known them for years. They're the very best in the business with Sierra Pacific. Just visit their website, andrewandtodd.com, 2 D's in Todd, or call them at 888-888-1172. Let them help you now. On Friday, the Dow was up 196 points, the NASDAQ was up 18, and the S&P was up 24. And in the new year, there is a huge rally underway in Europe. I think it's because the vaccine of the AstraZeneca vaccine is rolling out so quickly. And England is up almost 3% today. Germany up 1%. The boom is back, and I believe it's going to be a lasting January boom as the world embraces economic reopening because of the 3, soon to be 5, soon to be 7 vaccines rolling around the world that will protect us from COVID. And that is a source of great and wonderful celebration. Go and get it today. Let me play a little bit more of the president's phone call. You've gotten a lot of the feel of it. It is not an impeachable offense. It is not a criminal act. And the TDS sufferers out there, they continue to reveal themselves as unbalanced and they lost the balance beam. They've lost their minds. Here's more of the call.
For the big numbers, but they are very substantial numbers. And I think you're going to find that they, by the way, a little information. I think you're going to find that they are shredding ballots because they have to get rid of the ballots because the ballots are unsigned. The ballots are corrupt. And they're brand new and they don't have seals. And there's a whole thing with the ballots, but the ballots are corrupt. And you're going to find that they are, which is totally illegal. It's more illegal for you than it is for them because you know what they did and you're not reporting it. That's a criminal offense. And you can't let that happen. That's a big risk to you and to Ryan, your lawyer. That's a big risk. But they are shredding ballots, in my opinion, based on what I've heard, and they are removing machinery, and they're moving it as fast as they can, both of which are criminal fines, and you can't let it, or letting it happen. I'm notifying you that you're letting it happen. So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find...
it goes on. That was the big reveal. That's what people are, you're in legal peril. It is not a threat. It is not an impeachable offense. It is not a crime. It is absolutely stupid to allege that. It's just stupid. It reflects a lack of an ability to grasp even the elementals of law. But that has been evident in the TDS world for a long, long, long time. I'll be explaining that in my Washington Post column a little bit later today, which we'll post over at the Washington Post, on why I would not object on January 6th to the certification, but why people who do object are not endangering. The TDS is so bad in people. I'm coming back with an important story. Jerry Hendricks on the United States Navy and where it needs to go. Don't go anywhere, America. Stay right where you are. Tuned in to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show brought to you by Sierra Pacific Mortgage. For more info, call 888-888-1172.
This is Lanhee Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The eyes of the political world are all on Georgia, and there's good reason for that. On January the 5th, voters in the Peach State will decide the fate of the next several years in American politics, and maybe beyond. A win by either or both of incumbent Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue will require President-elect Joe Biden and his liberal allies in Congress to work together with Republicans to pass common-sense legislation, rather than pursuing progressive priorities like the Green New Deal. And it will mean that some of Biden's more extreme appointments, people who either aren't qualified or who are far out of the mainstream, will be rejected by the Senate. The runoff elections on January the 5th will be held in Georgia, but their impact will be felt by more than the 10 million people who live there. All Americans should recognize that nothing short of the course our country will take for the next several years is at stake. I'm Lanhee Chen.
Considering a career in politics? Consider Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
What's your current take on masks?
Current take on masks is they have very little efficacy. This has been studied over and over and over again in the past, but we ignore the past, and we put together anecdotal evidence now to support mask use. And I think to mask the healthy population is just not warranted scientifically. If you're ill and you're coughing and sneezing, certainly having a mask on can reduce the respiratory secretions that come out of your mouth and potentially spread. But to mask the healthy population, in my opinion, doesn't make sense.
I'm talking with Dr. Jeffrey Barkey. Dr. Barkey, literally hours ago, Joe Biden just gave a speech in which he pretty much trashed the Trump administration's response to the coronavirus. He ended the speech by saying, wear a mask.
Yeah. Well, I think he actually looks better in a mask, so it would be appropriate for him. You know, Sage, I heard you say earlier that there's a lot about the coronavirus and in particular this new coronavirus that has come out. And you're right, we don't know a lot about it. We have a lot to learn, but we do know a lot about some of our elected officials that are not basing their decisions on science. Our own governor in California, for example, that just announced there'll be an additional 3-week lockdown of our economy. There's no science to support that. I think it's wrong. It's tyrannical. It causes more harm than good.
Give me your take on these 2 vaccines, soon to be a 3rd vaccine. By what time do you think we will resume to something resembling normalcy?
That's a good question. Well, if we actually use the vaccines appropriately, I think it would be sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, we're not doing that.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
I don't know if we had anything to do with it, but here's a more bizarre. Dr. Ken Berry, right here in the good old United States, his building, his doctor's office was burned to the ground. The fire marshals could not find how the fire was started. It was a very hot fire, and they burned his building to the ground. He wrote a book called Things Your Doctor Doesn't Want You to Know. He also advocates for meat and less sugar, less grains. If that's not bizarre enough, about 4 weeks after that fire, his home burned to the ground.
Oh, my God.
They could not find anything. They couldn't find how it got started. The whole thing just incinerated. So if you think this is Vinny just being paranoid or goofy or anything else, I don't think so. I just gave you 3 wonderful examples of how this happens all the time.
I have 0 horses in this race. 0. But everything I read leads me to believe that meat is good for you. I have no great love of it. I don't dislike it. I'm neutral. But I do care about your health. And had you folks listened to me from the beginning about carbs, a lot of people might have avoided type 2 diabetes.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
You've written a few books about Johnny Cash, about Steve McQueen, and now the new one coming up in a couple of months here about Billy Graham. You told the story of Steve McQueen coming to faith. You told the story of Johnny Cash and his profound Christian faith. And now the third in this series is about Billy Graham. What's the title of that book?
It's called Billy Graham, The Men I Knew. And, you know, Billy's sort of the glue between Johnny and Steve. Billy was very close with Johnny Cash. And, you know, Johnny had a lot of struggles. He struggled with him.
Welcome back, America. I have been telling you for weeks now that Jerry Hendrick's brand new book, To Provide and Maintain a Navy, is a must-read for civilians and uniformed military alike. It is comprehensive. It is completely comprehensible as well. Comprehensive and comprehensible are the key words. Jerry Hendricks joins me. Good morning, Captain. Great to speak with you.
Good morning, Hugh, and thanks for having me on.
This is part 2 of our conversation, and so people can go listen to part 1. I want to get to the part where we need to rebuild the Navy for a very specific reason. On page 60, you point out in the last dozen years, China signaled and then followed through on a comprehensive plan to establish a blue water Navy. And you cite none other than the great Andrew Marshall flagging that decision to the 2008 deployment of the People's Liberation Army Navy to the Gulf of Aden. Why did that matter to the genius that was Andrew Marshall?
Well, I mean, we noted that China had largely been staying at home, exercising its fleet in the first island chain, and really only having what we would call a shallow water Navy. The fleet was only large enough in terms of the size of the ships to go out, operate for 2 to 3 days, and then they had to come into port to refuel and resupply and get food. In 2008, the Chinese Navy began to push out to join Task Force 155, which is a multinational task force to combat piracy. Well, what that opportunity gave them was the ability to begin operating for long duration at sea. They began to actually send 2 captains out per ship so they could double the amount of training and experience. They began to do things like underway refueling and underway replenishment at sea, which are aspects and characteristics of a blue water Navy. So that international action, counter-piracy, actually gave China the ability to grow as a Navy, and also gave them the chance to gain experience and improve their ship design, which they've done consistently since 2008. And by the way, they've continued to maintain a presence in that task force, gaining experience and beginning to interact with other navies around the world, learning from them. And they've really demonstrably improved as a blue water Navy since then.
One of the great virtues of To Provide and Maintain a Navy, Captain Hendricks's new book, and I will repeat the title 7 times, To Provide and Maintain a Navy, To Provide and Maintain a Navy. I'm going to do it over and over again so you go out and get To Provide and Maintain a Navy, is that it discusses the key, which is preventing war is as important as winning war. And in this era, preventing a war, Captain Hendricks, depends upon the American fleet being of adequate size and deployed.
Yeah, it's important to understand that the last 70 years of peace at sea is really a historical aberration. And I show in the book essentially the number of battles and major wars that occur at sea through the 17th, 18th, 19th, and through the early 20th century. But then comes 1945 and the end of World War II, and then boom, we've essentially had 70 years of peace at sea, and it's become so peaceful that it's assumed. Everyone just thinks that we're going to get up in the morning, the seas will be peaceful, we'll be able to move merchandise and trade across the oceans unencumbered, no one's going to come and steal your stuff off from ships. And this has allowed everyone to make these massive investments in ships and container ships and oil tankers that are increasingly large in size and also increasingly vulnerable. But one of the things I point out in the book, and I tie this together, this 70 years has been a period of unparalleled economic expansion. We've seen the growth of the world economy. We've seen the increase in individual life expectancies across the world. We've seen the rise of literacy across the world. And it's all tied to this period of economic expansion, which is directly tied to this period of a peaceful sea. But that's kind of coming to an end, and we began to see this tipping point as piracy has begun to come, and we've begun to see contestment of the concept of the free sea, as both China and Russia have sought to establish territorial claims over larger portions of the waters near their coasts. And this has largely come on. Why? Because the U.S. Navy has shrank. That 70 years of peace was because the U.S. Navy was so large and was so capable that no one was going to challenge us at sea. But when we allowed the fleet to fall to a size of 271 ships in 2015, this created a power vacuum and essentially invited powers such as China and Russia to go ahead and challenge the United States and the West at sea, and that's to our detriment.
Now, to the civilian out there, if you want to know the difference between the aircraft carrier, the cruiser, and the destroyer, this is the book for you. If you want to know the difference between an attack submarine and a boomer, To Provide and Maintain a Navy is for you. If you want to know which way Navy forces are going, To Provide and Maintain a Navy is for you. But I got to say, it made me sad, Captain Hendricks, because the greatest missed opportunity the last 4 years was to organize and rally support for an expansion of the American fleet. Now, that is beginning. I wish your book had existed 4 years ago. And I hope I really hope Democrats read this, because it ought to be something on which Democrats and Republicans can agree that, I think you say, you cannot surge trust, and there is no such thing as virtual presence. We've got to have this Navy.
Yeah, it's true. Numbers, as Admiral Stavridis, my mentor, often tells us, quantity has a quality all of its own. And we know that there was sort of this threshold when the Navy slipped below 300 ships, and actually when it sort of crashed through 350 on its way down, that's when the Chinese and the Russians began to lean forward. They got hungry. They anticipated the fact that the Americans were no longer going to be able to maintain the rule sets at sea. But Hugh, I'm actually as disappointed as I am that we didn't make greater gains over the last 4 years. When the Trump administration, obviously the president himself called for 350 ships in 2016 when he was running. I was disappointed we didn't get more done over the last 4 years. But I'm hopeful right now with the current makeup of the Congress. I do believe this is a bipartisan issue. You look at people like Representative Sherrill of New Jersey, who is a Naval Academy graduate, a helicopter pilot with 10 years of experience, or Representative Loria of Virginia, who is a Navy commander of 20 years experience, a surface nuclear-powered qualified officer. And then you look at others like Representative Seth Moulton, a Marine Corps veteran, or Lieutenant General Jack Bergman, who is a congressman now from Michigan's 1st District, who was a helicopter and fixed-wing pilot. We have supporters of the Navy, both on the Republican side, obviously Representative Whitman, the ranking member, people like Representative Banks and Gallagher, our friends, and even over in the Senate, Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii has a deep interest in the Navy, Senator Kane of Virginia, King of Maine, as well as people like Senator Perdue, Cotton, and Wicker. I think there's a chance to have a bipartisan consolidation around the importance of the Navy and growing it going forward. It's clearly in our nation's national interest. But more than that, it's in the interest of the West writ large. This is something our allies and partners recognize the importance of, because a free sea actually undergirds the very concept of individual freedom. We actually sort of got the idea of what to be free is by watching the ability of ships pass unencumbered across the sea, carrying their goods and cargo.
And I am hopeful as you are. Your good friend Mark Montgomery was the executive director, Admiral Montgomery, of the Cyber Solarium that was co-chaired by Angus King and Mike Gallagher. And much of their recommendations made it into the National Defense Authorization Act. And I'm hoping that to provide and maintain a Navy is the sort of beginning point where they might come together in this year's NDAA and actually put the plan together. The payoff for a civilian is really at page 102. You described the 2020 Navy and the 2040 Navy. And if this had been the Trump's plan from the beginning, we might be further down the road to it. And I know people will argue around the edges, but your comprehensive case is pretty doggone comprehensive, Captain Hendricks.
Well, I thought it was important. And mind you, the book is only about 108 pages long, which means it's something that can be read in a weekend. And yet I think it's in-depth enough that you really get the idea both behind the philosophy of navies, why they exist, the idea of the free sea, sort of the undergirding ideas, But then I went ahead and I built in that infrastructure argument. So I described what carriers are, cruisers are, destroyers, how many you need, and why they complement each other, how they plug in into fleet design. And then I sort of culminate in my final conclusion to make this recommendation of the fleet that we need targeting at 2040, because I really think that this great power competition we're in is going to come to a crescendo in the next 15 years. And we need to get leaning forward if we want to head it off. If you want to preserve the peace, then you have to grow your Navy, and you have to grow it in such a way that you anticipate the ability to win the war if the other guy wants to jump ugly with you.
And if you're going to be a civilian who doesn't want to sound stupid, you need to know what the cannonball rule is, and you have to understand what a hypersonic missile does. You have to understand how the dreadnought changed everything, and how the submarine changed everything after that, and how the aircraft carrier changed everything after that, and now how the hypersonic cruise missile changes everything after that. And you do a good job of that, Jerry, but I want to close on something that everyone will already understand. If we get back into shipbuilding, we don't have the yards. We don't have the vocational schools that teach people how to work in the yards. And so you have a holistic approach. It's not just the ship count at the end. It's the industrial infrastructure we need to maintain it and to build it.
Yeah, so the idea there is we need to get back to being a sea power, which is the idea that you need to have a balance between your civilian merchant fleet as well as your naval fleet. And you need to have the educational opportunities in your high schools and in your technical colleges to create the welders, the pipe fitters, the electricians, the heating and air conditioning people to build ships. One of the problems the U.S. Navy has today is we have a backlog of maintenance because we don't have enough shipyard capacity to repair the ships as well as build them. We can gain that by recreating our civilian shipbuilding industry, because a lot of those skills and trades carry over into naval or military ship production. We need to take a holistic approach to rebuilding our nation and rededicating ourselves to becoming a sea power again, as we were in our beginning. That's how our nation was founded. That's why I titled the book this, To Provide and Maintain a Navy, which actually comes from Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, which really emphasizes that this nation was going to be focused on the sea, to the exclusion of other, avenues and threats. And I think we have to get back to our roots.
It is a primer and it is a deep dive at the same time. And To Provide and Maintain a Navy is the best $20 you will spend in 2021. Congratulations, Captain Jerry Hendricks. I know you worked on this all last year, and it's a timely book. And I hope you go off and distribute it to every member of the Armed Services Committee.
Well, thank you, Hugh, and I appreciate being on, and I'm off to kind of do that today.
Well, very good. Take it, put them under your shoulder and carry them around, because it's a fine, fine piece of work. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Hugh. I
got to tell you, To Provide and Maintain a Navy really is going to be the best $20 you spend, especially if you're a civilian. Hey, friends, you've got to vote. If you're in Georgia, I remind you of what Chuck Schumer said, cut number 1.
Now we take Georgia, and then we change the world. Yeah! I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Mr. Schumer? Now we take Georgia, and then we change America.
Yeah, that's what he wants to do, change America. And you remember what Raphael Warnock said about serving God in the military? Let's play that too.
America, nobody can serve God and the military.
Remember how John Ossoff threatened everyone? Let's play the threat.
We need to send a message this year. We need to send a message that if you indulge this kind of politics, you're not just going to get beaten. You're going to get beaten so bad you can never run or show your face again in public. Because we have had enough, absolutely enough.
Never show your face again in public. That's your choice. Radicals or re-elect David Perdue and send Kelly Loeffler back, and you should do that. You should also get your ReliefFactor.com. ReliefFactor.com is what you need every day to fight off the aches and pains. If you're going to work the polls tomorrow in Georgia, and we need a lot of poll workers in Georgia, take your Relief Factor before you leave the house. Absolutely necessary. Get you the temporary support for the minor aches and pains of everyday life, ReliefFactor.com. Coming back with Josh Kraushaar for a final chat about Georgia. When I return, don't go anywhere, America.
This is Lanhee Chen of the Hoover Institution for townhall.com. The eyes of the political world are all on Georgia, and there's good reason for that. On January the 5th, voters in the Peach State will decide the fate of the next several years in American politics and maybe beyond. A win by either or both of incumbent Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue will require President-elect Joe Biden and his liberal allies in Congress to work together with Republicans to pass common sense legislation rather than pursuing progressive priorities like the Green New Deal. And it will mean that some of Biden's more extreme appointments, people who either aren't qualified or who are far out of the mainstream, will be rejected by the Senate. The runoff elections on January the 5th will be held in Georgia, but their impact will be felt by more than the 10 million people who live there. All Americans should recognize that nothing short of the course our country will take for the next several years is at stake. I'm Lanhee Chen.
Considering a career in politics? Consider Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy. Learn more at publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu. Trending now on The Mike Gallagher Show.
Listen to what Joe Biden said about the actions like the one we saw last night in Minneapolis to literally defund the police.
But I also don't think we should get too far ahead of ourselves on dealing with police reform in that, because they've already labeled us as being defund the police. Anything we put forward in terms of the organizational structure to change policing, which I promise you will occur, promise you. Just think to yourself and give me advice whether we should do that before January 5th, because that's how they beat the living hell out of us across the country, saying that we're talking about defunding the police. We're not. We're talking about holding them accountable.
Nothing screams holding them accountable better than stripping $8 million from the police department in Minneapolis, which, of course, will result in... Here's how this works. If you don't have funds for the police, if you funnel them into, mental health counselors, and good luck handling a raging, violent criminal, good luck with that if you're a mental health counselor. Maybe you can sit there and start singing folk music to somebody who's, waving a machete around. Maybe you could go back and ask them if they wet the bed when they were a child as they're, on a rampage. Oh, we're not. But this is a very important clip from Biden. You've got to know exactly his intention.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Charlie Kirk Show.
I don't love the fact that Congress is now getting involved in our elections. I don't. This is not something that I have great delight in. This is not something that
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined now by Josh Kraushaar. Hotline Josh on Twitter. Follow him there and read everything he writes. Josh, Georgia votes tomorrow. How do you assess the races?
Well, look, it's going to be fascinating tonight to see what the president has to say. There's a lot of concern in Republican circles that turnout in the early part of the election, it wasn't where Republicans hoped it would be. They're counting on President Trump to excite the base up in northern Georgia. And but they're worried about about the tape, about what the president is trying to accomplish in his final weeks in office, and they're worried that the party is divided at the worst possible time. So there's definitely a lot of anxiety in Republican circles.
Now, Josh, I played most of the tape today because I'm the highest rated show in Atlanta during drive time, and I want people to actually hear the tape because I think there's a lot of hysteria around it. But I want to look at that early vote. More than 3 million. I don't know if that was ahead or behind the early vote in the November election. I think it's behind at about 80%. But what do you know the number?
Yeah. The numbers are on the Georgia Secretary of State's website. But yeah, it's a little behind where it was on election day. Now, I think it can be a little misleading because the president has he's sort of discouraged people from voting early. So you could see a big surge in Republican turnout on Tuesday. So I think it's premature to draw any firm conclusions. The Democrats are satisfied that they did turn out their base. In fact, voters that didn't show up in the November election actually did show up in the runoff. So Republicans will need a very healthy turnout on Election Day to overcome some Democratic strength in the city of Atlanta and the surrounding suburbs. But look, I mean, it's all about whether the Republican Party is united or is divided in the final days before the runoff. And what the president says tonight, the message he delivers, is going to be very important to whether...
I think it's kind of a broken glass thing, Josh. I really do believe every voter in Georgia knows the stakes, and they know that Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff are not your ordinary Angus King or Amy Klobuchar kind of Democrat. I think they're going to be worried about how hard left they are. But tell me a little bit about the new voters. There's no way to know who those new voters are, is there?
Well, they are younger. They're surrounded. They're predominantly concentrated in the suburban Atlanta area. There's more African American turnout than there was relative to the general election. So these are younger, diverse voters that many may not have even been eligible to vote in November. They turned 18 in the last couple of months, but turnout on the Democratic side has been strong, and Republicans need the Trump part of the party and the establishment part of the party to come together. And it doesn't seem like, whatever you think of the tape, Trump is at war with the Secretary of State and the governor of Georgia, both Republicans. So that's not the look you want in a very...
I just disagree. I know people have that opinion within the Beltway. I just disagree. I don't think you can extrapolate anything. In fact, I read an analysis at 538, which I just shook my head saying, well, we've got higher turnout in traditionally Democratic-leaning areas, and if they're at 70 or 80% of the original turnout from last year, I don't know how you can extrapolate anything with certainty. That could be the Republicans, like Republicans in Cuyahoga County don't have to win Cuyahoga County in Ohio. They just have to close the gap over what it was in the previous election to have a good year.
Well, you should be skeptical because a lot of people try to extrapolate the early vote, and you just don't know what the denominator is. You don't know how many people are going to show up. So you don't know whether Democrats are cannibalizing the Election Day vote in the early vote because they want to vote early, and that Republicans are going to turn out in large numbers, or whether there is a market increase in Democratic votes. I will say, though, Hugh, that, look, Republicans, you hit the nail on the head. You have two very liberal Democratic nominees far to the left of the type of candidates Democrats usually nominate in a state like Georgia. And if Democrats win those seats, it's not going to be because of their candidates. It's going to be because Republicans didn't turn out enough of their voters. It's going to be because they didn't win enough of the vote in the suburbs where they usually dominated in past elections. So, it's going to be the fact. I mean, if Republicans can't win seats in a reddish state like Georgia, it's not going to be because Democrats had strong candidates. It's going to be because the president and the governor of the party are on totally opposite sides of a very important issue right now.
And if Republicans, as I suspect they will, my prediction is they'll win both seats, win easily, it'll be because of this Chuck Schumer quote. Can we play cut one?
Now we take Georgia, and then we change the world. Yeah! I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Mr. Schumer? Now we take Georgia, and then we change America.
What do you think, Josh Kraushaar? Does he regret that statement?
Oh, I'm sure he does, and it should be a rallying cry for Republican voters. In any other context, Republicans would be favored to win these two elections. They usually win runoffs in Georgia. Warnock not only has a record of public statements from the pulpit at his church, but he has an issue of the domestic case that's been litigated on the airwaves in Georgia. These are not. John Ossoff would be the youngest senator who has very little professional experience in politics, government, or anywhere else. So I mean, these are not ready for primetime Democratic candidates. You have the message that Schumer said that you played. These are races Republicans should win in a state like Georgia in a post-November period. They almost always do. So if they don't, that means something else is going on here that would create such an unusual circumstance, and it's because I think that the party is divided, and Trump is fueling some of those divisions.
It is a wildly, wildly important election. Josh Kraushaar, great to talk to you. Hotline Josh on Twitter for the latest from the Georgia races and everything political. I'll be back tomorrow to wake up Atlanta and get them out to vote, and the rest of Georgia. Everybody, prepare to vote tomorrow. It matters so much. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Ben and Harley. Talk to you tomorrow on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.